An ongoing armed conflict between Israel and Palestinian militant groups led by Hamas, 35L, began on 7 October 2023, 36, 37, 38, with a coordinated surprise offensive on Israel. The attack began with a rocket barrage of at least 3,000 rockets launched from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip against Israel. 39. In parallel, approximately 2,500 Palestinian militants breached the Gaza-Israel barrier, attacking military bases and massacring civilians in neighboring Israeli communities. 40. At least 1,400 Israelis were killed. 26. Including 260 people who were massacred at a music festival. 41, 42, 43, unarmed civilian hostages and captured Israeli soldiers were taken to the Gaza Strip, including women and children. 44, 45, 46, 47, the surprise attack was met with Israeli retaliatory strikes. 48, and Israel formally declared war on Hamas a day later. 48. After clearing Hamas forces from affected areas, Israel responded with airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. 49, which have killed more than 2,215 Palestinians as of 14 October. 14, the United Nations reported that around 1 million Palestinians, nearly half of the population of Gaza, have been internally displaced. 50, fears of a humanitarian crisis were heightened after Israel cut off food, water, electricity, and fuel supplies to Gaza, which had already been blockaded by both Egypt and Israel. 51, 52. Israel ordered the evacuation of 1.1 million Gazans, while Hamas called on residents to stay put in their homes. 53, 54, there were widespread deaths of civilians, and United Nations independent experts and human rights groups have accused both Hamas and Israel of committing war crimes during the conflict. 55, internationally, protests occurred in many locations and hate crimes against Jews increased. 56. Since 2006, Israel and Hamas have gone to war several times. Palestinians and Israelis have historically had a large variety of grievances against one another. Hamas avoided major engagements with Israel in 2022 and most of 2023, and instead, appeared to be covertly preparing, 63, for their major offensive, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. At least 44 countries have denounced Hamas and labeled its conduct as terrorism, while countries across the Middle East called for de-escalation and have attributed the root cause to Israel's decades-long occupation of the Palestinian territories. 64, 65, 66, 67, many Arab states called for a de-escalation. 68, a conflict was reported between militants in Lebanon, including Hezbollah, and Israeli forces on 8 and 9 October. 69, the United States deployed an aircraft carrier battle group to the eastern Mediterranean. The United Kingdom declared it would send warships and aircraft. 70, and Germany began supplying military aid to Israel. 71. Name. Palestinian militants dubbed the assault Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, or Deluge, N. 72, 73, 74, while Israel named its counteroffensive Operation Swords of Iron, 76. Several news agencies and observers have speculated regarding whether the conflict may spark a third intifada, following the prior Palestinian uprisings of the First and Second Intifadas, 77, 78, 79. Others have referred to it as the Sukkot War, after the festivity celebrated the day the attack started, and analogously to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, 80, 81. Numerous analysts and officials have described the initial assault as Israel's 9/11.82, in response to the statement that it was the Israeli 9/11. U.S. Secretary of State, Antony J. Blinken, said that it was, per capita, an attack equal to 10 times that of 9/11/83. The Gaza Strip and Israel have been in conflict since the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005 and Hamas gaining control of the Gaza Strip after winning Palestinian elections in 2006 and a civil war with Fatah in 2007. 84. The Gaza Strip has been under an Egyptian and Israeli blockade since 2007, leading Human Rights Watch to call it an open-air prison and state that Israel should end the generalized ban on travel to and from Gaza and allow widespread freedom of movement between Gaza and Israel. 85. The blockade has caused significant economic hardship within Gaza. 86. And Israeli settler violence was cited by Hamas as some of the reasons for its offensive. 87. Israel said that the blockade was necessary to protect Israeli citizens from terrorism. rocket attacks and any other hostile activity, and to prevent dual-use goods from entering Gaza. 88. In Egypt, Hamas is widely seen as closely associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, which they consider to be a terrorist organization. 89. At the time of the attack, Israel and Saudi Arabia were conducting negotiations to normalize relations, with Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recently stating that normalization was for the first time real. 90. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry said in a statement that it had repeatedly warned that Israel's ongoing occupation of Gaza would propel further violence. 91. In September, 2 to 3 weeks of violence occurred at the Gaza-Israel barrier. On September 29, Qatar, the UN, and Egypt mediated an agreement between Israel and Hamas officials in the Gaza Strip to reopen closed crossing points and de-escalate tensions. 92, 93, 94. Israeli politics has historically been dominated by social democratic, secular parties in the peace camp that made significant efforts to forge a peace process with the Palestinians from its founding to the early 2000s, most notably in the case of Yitzhak Rabin during the Oslo Accords. 95, 96. Their influence declined significantly in Israeli politics after the Palestinian National Authority declared war on the country during the Second Intifada of 2000 to 2005. Palestinian suicide bombings were a prominent feature of the fighting and mainly targeted Israeli civilians, contrasting with the relatively less violent nature of the First Intifada, decimating attempts to resolve the conflict through talks. The New York Times writes, the waning of attempts at a peace process began in the 2000s, when a wave of Palestinian violence was interpreted by many Israelis as a rejection of efforts by Palestinians to peacefully resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That discredited a prior push in Israel for greater Palestinian sovereignty and boosted the narrative that Israel could not count on Palestinians to negotiate a lasting peace. 95. After the 2022 Israeli legislative election in November, a Netanyahu-led right-wing government took office the following month. The government ramped up settlement construction in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, an increase in settler attacks there, which has displaced hundreds of Palestinians, and tensions flaring around a flashpoint Jerusalem holy site, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 58. Hamas stated that their attack was in response to the Egyptian-Israel blockade on Gaza, continued settlements, settler violence, and restrictions on movement between Israel and Gaza. 58. 97. Other analysts doubted this reasoning given by Hamas, suggesting it was a means of gathering Western sympathy, and that its ideology had always been and had remained what they called genocidal against Jews. 98. Political analyst and terrorism scholar Bruce Hoffman stated, in sum, among Hamas, any compromise over this land, including the moribund two-state solution, much less coexistence among faiths and peoples, is forbidden. 98. Michael Milstein, head of the Palestinian Studies Forum at Tel Aviv University, argued it's absolutely clear that the basic reasons was not the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or the war in the West Bank, or the economic situation in Gaza, or the Saudi-Israeli negotiations. It was much deeper. It was a part of the long-term vision of Hamas to eradicate Israel, absolutely. In order to understand Hamas, you have to know Arabic, and you have to read things in Arabic and listen to Hamas preachers and Hamas leaders when they speak to their own people. It's absolutely different from the things that are translated to us in Hebrew or English. 99. According to the New York Times, the Palestinian Authority hasn't held national elections since 2006, partly because Mr. Abbas fears losing to Hamas. Peace negotiations with Israel officially ended in 2014, 100, in Gaza and the West Bank. By the 2020s, Hamas had emerged the dominant political force within the Palestinian territories. 101, 102, 103. The Palestinian Liberation Authority and Fatah became deeply unpopular among most Palestinians. 100. According to Ido Hek, a majority of Gazans support the agenda of Hamas, with its only significant political rival now being the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Organization. 104. For years, polling has indicated that large majority in Gaza support terror attacks on Israeli civilians as well as a third intifada against Israel. 105, 106. In 2023, there were several violent flare-ups in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Prior to the attack, including combatants and civilians on both sides, at least 247 Palestinians had been killed by Israeli forces, while 32 Israelis and 2 foreign nationals had been killed in Palestinian attacks. 107, 108. The attack took place during the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah on Shabbat, 109, and a day after the 50th anniversary of the start of the Yom Kippur War, which also began with a surprise attack, 110. Timeline. For a chronological guide, see Timeline of the 2023 Israel-Hamas War. For a more comprehensive list, see List of military engagements during the 2023 Israel-Hamas War. October 7. Main article, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Palestinian Offensive. Rocket barrages. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack, claiming to have fired more than 5,000 rockets into Israel from the Gaza Strip within a 20-minute span, 107. See also, Palestinian rocket attacks on Israel. At around 6:30 a.m. Israel Summer Time, UTC+3, on 7 October 2023, 107, Hamas announced the start of what it called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, stating that it had fired over 5,000 rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel within a span of 20 minutes. Israeli sources reported that at least 3,000 projectiles had been launched from Gaza. At least 5 people were killed by the rocket attacks, 39, 111, 44, 112. Explosions were reported in areas surrounding the Strip and in cities in the Sharon Plain including Gedera, Herzliya, 113, Tel Aviv, and Ashkelon, 112. Air raid sirens were also activated in Beersheba, Jerusalem, Rehovot, Rishon LeZion, and Palmachim Air Base, 114, 115, 116. Hamas issued a call to arms, with senior military commander Mohammed Deif calling on Muslims everywhere to launch an attack. 44. Palestinian militants also opened fire on Israeli boats off the Gaza Strip, while clashes broke out between Palestinians and the Israel Defense Forces in the eastern section of the Gaza perimeter fence. 114. In the evening, Hamas launched another barrage of about 150 rockets towards Israel, with explosions being reported in Jabna, Givatayim, Bet Yam, Beit Dagon, Tel Aviv, and Rishon LeZion. 111. Incursions into Israel. Further information: standoff in Be'eri and Ofakim, Battle of Re'im, Battle of Sderot, Battle of Zikim, Re'im Music Festival Massacre, Netiv HaAsra Attack, Be'eri Massacre, Kfar Aza Massacre, Nir Oz Massacre, and Ein HaShlosha Massacre. Approximate situation on 7 to 8 October. Satellite view of widespread fires in Israel on October 7, 2023, when militants set fires, massacred civilians and took hostages at areas neighboring the Gaza Strip. 113. CCTV footage of Hamas members murdering people in Mafalsim on October 7. Simultaneously, around 511 Palestinian militants infiltrated Israel from Gaza using trucks, pickup trucks, motorcycles, bulldozers, speedboats and paragliders. 110, 107, 90, they took over the checkpoint at the Kerem Shalom crossing and created openings in the border fence in 5 other places, including by the Erez crossing. 117, images and videos appeared to show heavily armed and masked militants dressed in black fatigues riding pickup trucks. 112, 116, and opening fire in Sderot, killing dozens of Israeli civilians and soldiers. Other videos appeared to show Israelis taken prisoner and a burning Israeli tank. 118, 44, as well as militants driving Israeli military vehicles. 112. On the same morning, a massacre unfolded at an outdoor music festival near Re'im, resulting in at least 260 dead, with many still missing. Witnesses recounted militants on motorcycles opening fire on fleeing participants, who were already dispersing due to rocket fire that had wounded some attendees. Some were also taken hostage. 109, 119, militants killed civilians at Nir Oz. 116, Be'eri, and Netiv HaAsra, where they took hostages. 120, and set fire to homes. 113, as well as in kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip. 113, 200 civilians were killed in the Kfar Aza massacre, 108 in the Be'eri massacre, and 15 people in the Netiv HaAsra massacre. 121, 122, in what has been described as the worst single-day massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. 123, 124, 125, 126, hostages were also reported to have been taken in Ofakim, while homes in Sderot were set on fire. 127, Hamas said it took prisoners to force Israel to release its Palestinian prisoners, claiming it had taken enough prisoners to secure the release of all the imprisoned Palestinians, including women and minors. 128. Hamas militants carried out an amphibious landing in Zikim. 112. 129. Palestinian sources claim that the local Israeli army base was stormed. 130. The IDF said it had killed 2 attackers on the beach and destroyed 4 vessels, including 2 rubber boats. A military base outside Nahal Oz was also taken by the militants, leaving at least 2 Israeli soldiers dead and at least 6 others captured. 131. Fighting was reported at Riam military base, headquarters of the Gaza division. 132. It was later reported that Hamas took control of the base and had taken several Israeli soldiers captive. 132. Before the IDF regained control later in the day. 133. 134. The police station of Sderot was reported to have come under Hamas control, with militants killing 30 Israelis, including policemen and civilians. 114. 135. Several Palestinian groups voiced their support for the operation. The National Resistance Brigades, the armed wing of the Secular Socialist Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, DFLP, confirmed their participation in the operation through their military spokesman Abu Khaled. 136, saying it had lost 3 fighters in combat with the IDF. 137, the PFLP, another Palestinian socialist militant group, and the Lion's Den group voiced their support for the operation and declared maximum alertness and general mobilization amongst their troops, and the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades, armed wing of the PFLP, published videos of it storming Israeli watchtowers. 138, 139. An Israeli military spokesman stated that the militants from Gaza had entered Israel through at least 7 locations. 110, and invaded 4 small rural Israeli communities, the border city of Sderot, and 2 military bases from both land and sea. 90. Israeli media reported that 7 communities came under Hamas control, including Nahal Oz, Kfar Aza, Megan, Be'eri, and Sufa. 140. The Erez crossing was reported to have come under Hamas control, enabling the militants to enter Israel from Gaza. 111. Israeli Police Commissioner Kobi Shabtai said that there were 21 active high-confrontation locations in southern Israel. 141. The attack, which coincided with the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, appeared to have been a complete surprise to the Israelis. 115. The Iron Dome air defense system was activated. 114. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant conducted security assessments at Israel Defense Forces, IDF, headquarters in Tel Aviv. 116. 112. Gallant later approved the mobilization of tens of thousands of army reservists. 107. 112, and declared a state of emergency for areas within 80 kilometers, 50 miles, of the Gaza border. 140. He also said that Hamas made a grave mistake in launching its attack and pledged that Israel will win. 110. The IDF declared a state of readiness for war. 111. It also said that the reservists were to be deployed not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and along the borders with Lebanon and Syria. 142. Residents in areas around the Gaza Strip were asked to stay inside, while civilians in southern and central Israel were required to stay next to shelters. 112. Roads around the Gaza Strip were closed by the IDF. 110. The streets of Tel Aviv were also locked down. 112. Following the assault, Israel declared a heightened state of preparedness for potential conflict. 143. The IDF declared a state of readiness for war, and Netanyahu convened an emergency gathering of security authorities. The IDF additionally reported their initiation of Operation Swords of Iron, a set of targeted actions in the Gaza Strip. 76. 144. 111. Israeli Police Commissioner Kobi Shabtai announced that a state of war existed, following what he called a massive attack from the Gaza Strip. 145. He also announced the closure of the entire southern region of Israel to civilian movement as well as the deployment of the Yamam counterterrorism unit to the area. 141. The IDF's chief spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said 4 divisions were deployed to the area, augmenting 31 pre-existing battalions. 110. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said the country was facing a very difficult moment, and offered strength and encouragement to the IDF, other security forces, rescue services, and residents who were under attack, 116, in a televised broadcast, Netanyahu stated, "We are at war." 90. He also said that the IDF would reinforce its border deployments to deter others from making the mistake of joining this war. 146. In a later address, he threatened to turn Gaza into a deserted island, and urged its residents to leave now. 147. Disputed, discuss. While Ben Gurion Airport and Ramon Airport remained operational, multiple airlines cancelled flights to and from Israel. 148. 149, 150, Israel Railways suspended service throughout portions of the country and replaced some routes with temporary bus routes. 151, 152, while cruise ships removed ports such as Ashdod and Haifa from their itineraries. 153. Overnight, Israel's Security Cabinet voted to undertake a series of actions to bring about the destruction of the military and governmental capabilities of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, according to a statement by the Prime Minister's office. 154. The Israel Electric Corporation, which supplies up to 80% of the Gaza Strip's electricity, cut off power to the area. 112. As a result, Gaza's power supply was reduced from 120 megawatts to only 20 megawatts, forcing it to rely on power plants paid for by the Palestinian Authority. 155. Main articles: Standoff in Be'eri and Ofakim and Be'eri massacre. In Be'eri, Hamas militants took up to 50 people hostage. During a standoff between militants and IDF forces, videos emerged from Be'eri showing the hostages being led by Hamas militants barefoot across a street in town. Approximately 18 hours after the standoff began, the IDF announced that they had freed the hostages in Be'eri. 156. In the town of Urim, a suburb of Ofakim, 2 Israelis were rescued by the IDF. 4 Hamas militants were killed, and 3 Israeli soldiers were injured during the rescue. 1. Airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. Destruction of the Palestine Tower in Gaza following an Israeli strike. Resultant damage in the Gaza Strip following an Israeli airstrike. The IDF announced it had launched attacks in Gaza using fighter jets, stating it successfully targeted 17 Hamas military compounds and 4 command centers. The operation included also strikes on the 11-story Palestine Tower in central Gaza City. The IDF believes that the building housed a specialized Hamas intelligence unit, equipped with advanced electronic warfare devices focused on disrupting the GPS reception of Israeli smart bombs and Iron Dome counter-rocket defense system. 111, 140, 157, 158, 159. Israel also struck 2 hospitals, killing an ambulance driver and a nurse. 112. October 8. Overnight, Israel struck up to 426 targets in the Gaza Strip. 160. The town of Beit Hanoun was mostly leveled by airstrikes. 161. And the Al-Amin Muhammad Mosque was destroyed. 162. 163. Targets also included various housing blocks, tunnels, homes of Hamas officials, and the Watan Tower, which served as a hub for internet providers in the area. 164. 165. 1 Israeli airstrike killed 19 members of the same family, including women and children. Wink with a frown. 166. Survivors of the airstrike said there were no militants in their area nor were they warned. 167. Another rocket barrage was launched in the morning, with 1 rocket hitting the Barzillai Medical Center in Ashkelon. 110. 168. Hamas also fired 100 rockets at Sderot. 164. The DFLP said that they were engaged with Israeli forces in Kfar Aza, Be'eri, and Kisafim. 137. Remains of the Sderot police station, following recapture by IDF. The Security Cabinet formally placed the country under a state of war for the first time since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. 169. 170. The IDF stated that 2 hostage situations had been resolved. 171. Following the arrival of IDF reinforcements, soldiers surrounded Sderot police station and regained control over it, killing at least 10 Hamas militants. 135, 172, 173. The IDF also said it had secured 22 locations from Palestinian forces but were still trying to clear 8 other locations, including Sderot and Kfar Aza. In one community, it rescued nearly 50 hostages. Several Palestinian gunmen riding in a stolen car were killed by Israeli forces near Ashkelon following a shootout on a main road. 160. At the same time, more Palestinian fighters were reported to have entered Magan. 150, while 70 Palestinian reinforcements arrived at Be'eri. 161. Evacuations of residents living near the Gaza Strip were ordered. 160, 150, and Netanyahu appointed former Brigadier General Gal Hirsch as the government's point man on missing and kidnapped citizens. 174. The IDF said it had called in up to 300,000 reservists and said it was aiming to eliminate Hamas's military capabilities and overthrow its rule over the Gaza Strip. 161. A lockdown was imposed on the West Bank by the IDF. 175. October 9. The IDF reportedly struck 500 targets in the Gaza Strip overnight, including the densely populated Jabalia refugee camp, reportedly causing dozens of casualties, including children. 176. IDF stated it established full control over Israeli towns around the Gaza perimeter fence. Operations against militants continued in Sderot. 177. Hamas said that it would execute Israeli hostages if Israel continued to bombard civilian homes without advanced warning. 178. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant announced a total blockade of the Gaza Strip that would cut electricity and block the entry of food and fuel, adding that we are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. 179. Human Rights Watch called the order abhorrent and called on the International Criminal Court to make note of this call to commit a war crime. 180, 181, the IDF said 15 communities around the Gaza Strip had been evacuated. 182. The Israeli Air Force deployed C-130 and C-130J heavy transport planes across Europe to collect hundreds of off-duty IDF personnel to be deployed in the conflict. 183. Hamas fired another barrage in the direction of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, with one rocket landing near a terminal of Ben Gurion Airport. 161. October 10. Further information, Haji Tower airstrike. On October 10, 2023, Israeli aircraft bombed a residential building in the Gaza Strip, the Haji Tower, containing offices for journalists, killing at least 3 journalists and injuring dozens. 184. Israeli forces reclaimed Kfar Aza and began collecting the dead, finding the bodies of victims mutilated, with women and babies beheaded and burnt in their homes. The bodies of 40 babies and young children were taken out on gurneys, out of what one estimate described as at least 100 civilian victims. 185, 186, 187, 188, 189, 190, 191, 192. The IDF said it had mobilized up to 360,000 reservists, and launched airstrikes at the Al-Daraj and Al-Furqan neighborhoods in Gaza, as well as the port of Gaza. It also largely destroyed the Al-Karama and Rimal neighborhoods of Gaza City, which hosted ministries of the Hamas-run government, universities, media organizations and aid agencies. 193. Israeli warplanes also struck the Rafah border crossing linking Gaza and Egypt. 194. The family residence of Mohammed Deif in Khan Yunis was also struck, killing his father, brother and at least 2 other relatives. 193. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir announced that the ministry was purchasing 10,000 rifles to arm civilian security teams, particularly in border communities, mixed Jewish Arab cities and West Bank settlements. He added that 4,000 assault rifles, as well as helmets and bulletproof vests had already been acquired from a domestic manufacturer and were to be distributed immediately. 195. Hamas militants carried out another incursion into an industrial zone in Ashkelon, where at least 3 of them were killed in clashes with the IDF. 193. Rockets were fired at Tel Aviv and Ashkelon. 193. October 11. Israeli warplanes struck and destroyed several buildings of the Islamic University of Gaza. 196, saying that it had been turned into a weapons factory and training ground. 197. Israel formed an emergency war government, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and former Defense Minister Benny Gantz heading a war cabinet with Gadi Eisenkot and Ron Dermer as observers. 198. Hamas fired rockets at Ashkelon. 193. Another rocket strike forced UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, who was visiting the town of Ofakim, to run for cover. 199, one person was injured and 4 buildings were hit following a rocket attack in Sderot, 200. An Israeli airstrike killed 4 IFRC paramedics inside an ambulance, 201. The Gaza Strip's only power plant ran out of fuel, and all supplies of gas and other types of fuel were cut off by Israel's and Egypt's blockade of the Gaza Strip, 202, 203. Israel struck the Gaza City port with white phosphorus artillery projectiles, 204, 205. October 12. Israel said it had bombed Hamas's elite Nukba forces, their command centers, and the residence of a senior Hamas naval operative that it said was used to store unspecified weapons. Commanders from 2 smaller militant groups were also reported to have been killed in airstrikes, 206. 4 people were injured and 7 houses were struck following a rocket attack in Sderot, 207. As the IDF continued to attack buildings and neighborhoods, the Gaza Health Ministry announced that the number of dead in Gaza had reached more than 1,400 people, including 447 children and 248 women, 208. Israeli Minister of Energy and Infrastructure Israel Katz stated that the lifting of the Gaza blockade would not occur until the hostages, who were abducted by Hamas, were safely returned to their homeland, 52. October 13. Further information, 2023 evacuation of northern Gaza, 2023 Israeli airstrikes on Palestinians fleeing Gaza City, and 2023 Israeli ground operations in the Gaza Strip. Early in the day, the IDF issued evacuation warnings for communities north of the Wadi Gaza, including Gaza City, within 24 hours, instructing people to move towards the south. 209, 210, the evacuation of northern Gaza, which would involve the displacement of 1.1 million Palestinians, was deemed impossible by the UN, who in a statement warned of devastating humanitarian consequences. 211, shortly after the evacuation orders were issued, UN facilities, including UNRWA, 212, were instructed to move to Rafah. 209, the Hamas Authority for Refugee Affairs responded by telling residents in northern Gaza to remain steadfast in your homes and to stand firm in the face of this disgusting psychological war waged by the occupation. 213, Doctors Without Borders issued a statement calling the order to evacuate outrageous and an attack on medical care and on humanity and condemned the Israeli order in the strongest possible terms. 214, the World Health Organization has released a plea appealing to Israel to immediately rescind orders for the evacuation of over 1 million people living north of Wadi Gaza, arguing that it's extremely difficult to move patients in critical care, medical supplies are depleting, and that the 4 Ministry of Health hospitals in South Gaza are already beyond capacity. 215, similar statements have been issued by UNICEF, 216, and IRC, 217. Hamas claimed at least 70 people fleeing south had been killed by Israeli airstrikes, 218. In the evening, the IDF stated that its ground forces had conducted localized raids into Gaza, saying they were attacking Hamas militants and searching for hostages taken during their attack, 219, 220. NBC News reported on top-secret Hamas documents that detailed plans to target elementary schools and a youth center in Kfar Saad, with the goal being to kill as many people as possible, take hostages and move them into the Gaza Strip. The plans were provided to NBC by Israeli first responders. 221. October 14. The IDF said it had killed Hamas's head of aerial operations Murad Abu Murad in an overnight airstrike. 222. It also announced a 6-hour window lasting from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. local time for refugees to flee south along specified routes within the Gaza Strip. 223, an explosion occurred at 5:30 p.m. on one of the safe routes specified by the IDF, killing 70, mostly women, children, and an infant. Some sources attributed it to an airstrike by the IDF, while CNN said that the cause was unclear. 224, 225. Outside Israel and the Gaza Strip. See also, October 2023 Hezbollah strike, 2023 Alexandria shooting, October 2023 Syrian-Israeli exchanges, Eris school stabbing, and storming of Jenin. October 7. Between the 7th and the 8th of October 11 Palestinian youths, including a 13-year-old, were killed in confrontations with Israeli forces throughout the occupied West Bank, 226, 227, 228. October 8. In the morning, Hezbollah fired rockets and shells at the Sheba Farms region, In response, the IDF fired artillery shells and sent a military drone into southern Lebanon. 229, 230, 5, 2 Lebanese children were reportedly injured by broken glass. 231. In Alexandria, Egypt, a policeman attacked Israeli tourists and their Egyptian guides, killing 2 Israelis and 1 Egyptian, and wounding a 3rd Israeli. The policeman was detained by the Egyptian police. 144. Video footage confirmed that a small unit belonging to Palestinian militias had arrived at the Jewish settlement of Sagat near occupied East Jerusalem. 232. According to the statement, the unit, made up of several fighters from Gaza, clashed with Israeli soldiers at the Kalandia checkpoint. 232. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered the deployment of the United States Navy's Carrier Strike Group 12, led by the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, and supported by the cruiser USS Normandy and the destroyers USS Thomas Hudner, USS Ramage, USS Carney, and USS Roosevelt, to the eastern Mediterranean. Additionally, the United States Air Force augmented its F-35, F-15, F-16, and A-10 fighter squadrons in the region. 233, 234. The Biden administration said this was done to deter other actors from entering the conflict. 235. Hamas called the move an attempt to boost the morale of the crumbling Israeli army and participation in the aggression against our people. 236. Likewise, Hezbollah said that sending aircraft carriers to the region will not frighten the resistance factions ready for confrontation until victory is achieved. 237. October 9. The IDF claimed to have killed several infiltrators from Lebanon and fired artillery across the border. Hezbollah denied involvement in the incident. 238. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad militia later claimed responsibility for the armed infiltration. 239. Later in the day, fighting began again between Hezbollah and Israeli troops, resulting in 3 Hezbollah gunmen being killed. 240. 3 IDF soldiers, including a senior officer, were killed. While the IDF's Home Front Command ordered residents in 28 towns in northern Israel to seek refuge in bomb shelters. 241. Artillery shelling was also reported from militants based in Syria. 193. October 10. Israeli police killed 2 Palestinians accused of throwing stones at them in East Jerusalem. 193. Clashes broke out again on the Israel-Lebanon border after Hezbollah fired an anti-tank guided missile at an Israeli military vehicle in the Avavim area, prompting a retaliatory Israeli helicopter strike. 242. October 11. Clashes broke out between Hezbollah and the IDF along the Israel-Lebanon border again. 193, with the IDF ordering residents in northern Israel to seek shelter following reports of drones being launched from southern Lebanon. 243, a Patriot missile was launched to intercept a suspicious projectile, after which the IDF found that the object in question was not a drone. 244, warning sirens were activated across northern Israel after reports emerged that up to 20 infiltrators on paragliders had entered Israeli territory from Lebanon before the IDF dismissed the report as a false alarm. 245, an IDF soldier was killed and another was injured in an anti-tank missile attack by Hezbollah. 246. In the West Bank, Israeli settlers attacked the village of Qusra, killing 4 Palestinians. A 16-year-old was fatally shot by the IDF in Bani Naim, while another person was also shot dead by the IDF near Bethlehem. 247. October 12. Syrian state TV said Israel launched attacks on the international airports of both Damascus and Aleppo. 248. Russia characterized the strikes as a violation of international law. 249. In the West Bank, 2 Palestinians were killed after Israeli settlers interrupted a funeral procession for Palestinians killed in prior settler attacks and opened fire. 250, 251, 206. October 13. Hezbollah Deputy Chief Sheikh Naim Qassem said that when time comes for any action, we will carry it out, stating that Hezbollah was ready and would contribute to confrontations against Israel according to its own plan. 252. The IDF fired artillery into southern Lebanon following an explosion that caused minor damage to a section of the Israel-Lebanon border wall near the kibbutz of Hanada. 253. A Lebanese Reuters correspondent was killed and at least 4 other journalists were injured. 254. An Israeli employee of the Israeli embassy in Beijing, China was stabbed and injured by a foreign national, 255. A teacher was killed and another teacher and a security guard were seriously wounded in a stabbing attack at a high school in Arras, France. The English attacker, 256, heard shouting Allahu Akbar during the attack, was arrested by police. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin confirmed that the attack was linked to the Israeli military offensive, 257. October 14. The IDF said it had killed 3 infiltrators from Lebanon in a drone strike near Margaliat, 258. Later in the afternoon, Hezbollah shelled 5 IDF outposts in the Sheba Farms, 259. Israeli UH-60 evacuating wounded personnel. At least 1,400 Israelis were killed, 26, 260, including 220 soldiers and 45 police officers, 261, 262, over 3,400 wounded, 27, and 130 to 150 IDF soldiers, 263, and civilians taken hostage. 264, casualties include about 70 Arab Israelis, especially Negev Bedouin, 265, 266, 267, 268. On October 7, over 100 civilians were killed in the Be'eri massacre, including children, and over 260 attendees were killed at a music festival in Reim. As of October 10, over 100 people had been reported killed in the Kfar Aza massacre, with the total death toll unknown, 186. 9 people were fatally shot at a bus shelter in Sderot, 110, at least 4 people were reported killed in Kyziv, 111, at least 400 casualties were reported in Ashkelon, 269, 116, while 280 others were reported in Beersheba, 60 of which were in serious condition, 110, in the north. Injuries from rocket attacks were reported in Tel Aviv, 270. Former Hapoel Tel Aviv FC striker Lior Aslan was among those killed in the Reim Music Festival massacre, 271. The head of the Sha'ar HaNegev Regional Council, Ophir Libstein, was killed in an exchange of fire with the militants, 272. The police commander of Rahat, Jared Davidov, was also killed, 273. Izar Peled, a police officer, was killed in Kfar Aza. The IDF confirmed that 258 of its soldiers had been killed, 274, among their confirmed dead were Colonel Yonatan Steinberg, the commander of the Nahal Brigade, who was killed near Kerem Shalom, Colonel Roy Levy, commander of the multidimensional Ghost Unit, who was killed near Kibbutz Reim Winkwithafrown 275, 276, and Lieutenant Colonel Eli Ginsberg, commander of the Loder Counter-Terrorism Unit School, 277, the Druze deputy commander of the 300th Baram Regional Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Alam Abdullah, was killed in action along with 2 other soldiers while responding to an infiltration from southern Lebanon on 9 October, 241. At least 150 Israelis were taken hostage by Hamas and transported to the Gaza Strip, 193. On October 8, Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed to be holding at least 30 captives, 278. At least 4 people were reportedly taken from Kfar Aza, 171. Videos from Gaza appeared to show captured people, with Gazan residents cheering trucks carrying dead bodies, 90. 4 captives were later reported to have been killed in Be'eri, 279, and Hamas indicated that an IDF airstrike on Gaza on October 9 killed 4 captives, 280. Among those believed to have been abducted was Vivian Silver, a peace activist and former board member of the human rights organization Tselem, who went missing following the attack on Be'eri. 281. Yedioth Aronoth photographer Roy Don was reported missing and likely captured alongside his child in Kfar Aza. His wife was killed and 2 of their children were able to hide in a closet until they were rescued. 282. On October 11, Hamas's Qassam brigades released a video appearing to show the release of 3 hostages, namely Shiri Silberman Bibas and her 2 children, in an open area near a fence. Israel dismissed the video as theatrics. 283. Palestinian. The Gaza Strip has suffered heavy civilian casualties from bombardment since the beginning of the war. The Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that, as of October 14, at least 2,215 Palestinians, including 724 children and 458 women had been killed and 8,714 others had been injured. 14, in the West Bank. Related violence since the start of the conflict had killed 53 Palestinians, with 16 deaths recorded on October 13 alone. 284. 4 Palestinians were killed and 5 others were wounded in clashes with the IDF along Gaza's perimeter fence. 111. The Israeli Defense Forces estimated on October 10 that the bodies of approximately 1,000 Palestinian militants had been found inside Israel. 16. 5 Palestinian militants were reported to have been killed in Sderot. 127. On October 8, 10 civilians were reportedly killed in a strike on a residential building in Shabora near Khan Yunis. 150. A Hamas leader named Ayman Yunus was reported to have been killed after a shelling. 39. On October 9, 19 people, including the leader of a local armed group, were killed in an airstrike in Rafah. 161. At least 50 people were reportedly killed in an airstrike on the Jabalia camp. 177. On October 10, the head of Hamas's National Relations Office, Zakaria Abu Muammar, was said to have been killed in Khan Yunis. 285. The IDF confirmed that they had killed Jawad Abu Shamala, the economy minister for Hamas, in a drone strike. 286. 287. On October 14, the IDF said it had killed Hamas's head of aerial operations Murad Abu Murad in an overnight airstrike. 288. 289. Foreign and dual national casualties. Posters in North Finchley, London, highlighting people kidnapped by Hamas during the war. As of October 11, The Washington Post reported that persons from 24 countries had been killed or went missing during the conflict. 290. The Nepali ambassador to Israel, Kanta Rigel, said at least 7 of its nationals in the country were injured in the attack, and that they along with 10 others were held captive by Hamas at an agricultural farm in Alummim. 30. 132. The Nepalese embassy later confirmed that 10 Nepalese students were killed during the attack in the area of Kibbutz Alummim. 333. Israeli media also reported that migrant workers from Thailand and the Philippines were also taken captive by Palestinian militants. 110. Thai authorities later confirmed that 21 of its nationals were killed during the Palestinian attack, while 14 others were injured and 16 were captured by the militants. 292. The Philippine government confirmed that 3 Filipinos were killed. 307, while 2 others were injured in the attacks, with authorities verifying reports of Filipinos being held captive by Hamas. 26 Filipinos were rescued by Israeli security forces. 334, 335, 336, while 3 Filipinos were unaccounted for. 307. A German-Israeli national, Shani Luke, was reportedly killed while attending the Re'im Music Festival. A video of Palestinians parading her near-naked body in a car was circulated on the internet, and her credit card was reportedly used subsequently in Gaza. 337, 319, 338. She was later said to be alive, but in critical condition in a hospital in Gaza. 339. Several other German citizens were reported to be among those kidnapped by militants. 333. At least 17 British citizens were reported as dead or missing. 260, including 1 attendee of the music festival. 340, 341, 12 Ukrainians, a Cambodian student, and a Chilean woman were confirmed to have been killed by Hamas. 296, 342, 318, 343, 344, 13 French citizens were killed, with an additional 17 missing, including 4 children. 295, 345. At least 29 Americans were killed during the attacks and 15 others were missing. 291. Mexico's Secretary of Foreign Affairs reported that 2 Mexican nationals were presumed to have been taken hostage by Hamas. 1 Brazilian national was reported as injured and 3 were reported missing. 346, 347. An Indian caregiver was injured by a rocket barrage in Ashkelon. 348, 337. The British Embassy confirmed the death of a British national who attended the music festival. 349. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez said 2 Spaniards were attacked without specifying their condition. 350. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani stated that an Italian-Israeli couple went missing in Bari. 351. 2 Tanzanian students were reported by their embassy to be missing. 352. The Russian embassy stated that 16 Russian nationals were killed and 8 others went missing following the attack. 294, 4 Argentinians were reported to have been killed and 3 were reported missing, 353. The Canadian government stated that 3 Canadians were killed, and that 2 other Canadians were missing. A Paraguayan couple was reported killed, with the government also reporting 2 nationals missing. An Irish attendee of the music festival was reported missing, 346. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Peru confirmed that a Peruvian Israeli soldier was killed in action on the front line, while 3 remained missing, 323. A Colombian couple attending the music festival was reported missing after the attack, 309. The Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported that 3 Austrian-Israeli dual nationals had been captured, and that one of them had later been confirmed dead, 301. South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation confirmed that 2 citizens, including a dual national, were killed, 314. Journalists. At least 6 Palestinian journalists in Gaza were reported to have been killed by Israeli attacks while in the line of duty. Ibrahim Mohammed Lafi, a photographer for Ein Media, was fatally shot during the attack on the Erez crossing on October 7, while Mohammed Jargoun, a reporter with Smart Media, was killed east of Rafah on the same day. Freelance journalist Mohammed El Salhi was also shot dead on the border east of Burej refugee camp on October 7. On October 9, Saeed Al-Tawil, editor-in-chief of Al-Kamsa news website, Mohammed Sub and Hisham El-Mwaja were killed by an airstrike while filming an anticipated attack in Gaza City. 2 other journalists were reported missing, and another was injured by shrapnel. The homes of 2 journalists were destroyed by shelling, and the offices of 4 media outlets were destroyed by airstrikes, 354. During clashes along the Israel-Lebanon border, an Israeli artillery strike on October 13 killed Reuters videographer Issam Abdullah and injured 6 other journalists from Reuters, Agence France-Presse and Al Jazeera, 355. In Israel, Roei Don, a photographer for Ynet, was reported missing and believed to have been taken hostage along with his 3-year-old daughter, while his wife was killed, shortly after documenting Hamas's attack on Kfar Aza, 356. The Committee to Protect Journalists reported that on October 7, a television crew from Sky News Arabia was assaulted, and their equipment damaged by Israeli police in Ashkelon, with correspondent Faras Lutfi saying that police aimed rifles at his head, forced him to undress and evicted them from the area under escort after confiscating their phones. 354. A crew from BBC Arabic was stopped, held at gunpoint, and assaulted by Israeli police in Tel Aviv on the night of 13 to 14 October, 357, 358. Health and aid workers. On October 11, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, reported that 9 of their workers were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Gaza Strip and that the UNRWA headquarters was being targeted by Israel. 359, it said a school sheltering more than 225 people was struck. 161, 11 members of UNRWA and 5 members of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies were killed in Gaza since the start of the fighting. 360. Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, said it had counted 16 medical personnel killed since 7 October. 361. MSF said a nurse and an ambulance driver were killed, and several others injured in Israeli strikes on the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis and the Indonesian hospital in Gaza City. 112. A paramedic was reported to be in critical condition. 111. 362. 363. The Indonesian Medical Emergency Rescue Committee, MERC, confirmed that a local staff member was killed near an operational MERC vehicle. 364. 365. Palestinians inspect the ruins of a destroyed residential building in Gaza City. Impacts. Humanitarian impact. In Gaza, Palestine Red Crescent Society ambulance after being damaged by an Israeli airstrike. The United Nations said that the fighting had displaced more than 423,000 Palestinians, 15, while Israeli airstrikes had destroyed 1,000 homes and rendered 560 housing units uninhabitable. It also said that Israeli actions had caused water shortages affecting 650,000 people, 206. The health ministry in Gaza said that 15 ambulances and 9 health institutions were targeted in Israeli attacks, including its headquarters, the Rimal Clinic and the International Eye Center. Médecins Sans Frontières said it had counted 18 ambulances destroyed and 8 medical facilities destroyed or damaged, 361. Following the shutdown of the Gaza Strip's only power station due to the lack of fuel caused by the Israeli blockade on October 11, it was reported that hospitals in Gaza would run out of available fuel to power generators in 3 days, 366. At least 6 Palestinian journalists in Gaza were reported to have been killed by Israeli attacks while in the line of duty. Ibrahim Mohammed Lafi, a photographer for Ein Media, was fatally shot during the attack on the Erez crossing on October 7, while Mohammed Jargoun, a reporter with Smart Media, was killed east of Rafah on the same day. Freelance journalist Mohammed El Salhi was also shot dead on the border east of Burej refugee camp on October 7. On October 9, Saeed Al-Tawil, editor-in-chief of Al-Kamsa news website, Mohammed Sub and Hisham El-Mwaja were killed by an airstrike while filming an anticipated attack in Gaza City. 2 other journalists were reported missing, and another was injured by shrapnel. The homes of 2 journalists were destroyed by shelling, and the offices of 4 media outlets were destroyed by airstrikes, 354. During clashes along the Israel-Lebanon border, an Israeli artillery strike on October 13 killed Reuters videographer Issam Abdullah and injured 6 other journalists from Reuters, Agence France-Presse and Al Jazeera, 355. In Israel, Roei Don, a photographer for Ynet, was reported missing and believed to have been taken hostage along with his 3-year-old daughter, while his wife was killed, shortly after documenting Hamas's attack on Kfar Aza, 356. The Committee to Protect Journalists reported that on October 7, a television crew from Sky News Arabia was assaulted, and their equipment damaged by Israeli police in Ashkelon, with correspondent Faras Lutfi saying that police aimed rifles at his head, forced him to undress and evicted them from the area under escort after confiscating their phones. 354. A crew from BBC Arabic was stopped, held at gunpoint, and assaulted by Israeli police in Tel Aviv on the night of 13 to 14 October. 357. 358. Health and aid workers. On October 11, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, reported that 9 of their workers were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Gaza Strip and that the UNRWA headquarters was being targeted by Israel. 359. It said a school sheltering more than 225 people was struck. 161. 11 members of UNRWA and 5 members of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies were killed in Gaza since the start of the fighting. 360. Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, said it had counted 16 medical personnel killed since 7 October. 361. MSF said a nurse and an ambulance driver were killed, and several others injured in Israeli strikes on the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis and the Indonesian hospital in Gaza City. 112. A paramedic was reported to be in critical condition. 111. 362. 363. The Indonesian Medical Emergency Rescue Committee, MERC, confirmed that a local staff member was killed near an operational MERC vehicle. 364. 365. Palestinians inspect the ruins of a destroyed residential building in Gaza City. Impacts. Humanitarian impact. In Gaza, Palestine Red Crescent Society ambulance after being damaged by an Israeli airstrike. The United Nations said that the fighting had displaced more than 423,000 Palestinians, 15, while Israeli airstrikes had destroyed 1,000 homes and rendered 560 housing units uninhabitable. It also said that Israeli actions had caused water shortages affecting 650,000 people, 206. The health ministry in Gaza said that 15 ambulances and 9 health institutions were targeted in Israeli attacks, including its headquarters, the Rimal Clinic and the International Eye Center. Médecins Sans Frontières said it had counted 18 ambulances destroyed and 8 medical facilities destroyed or damaged, 361. Following the shutdown of the Gaza Strip's only power station due to the lack of fuel caused by the Israeli blockade on October 11, it was reported that hospitals in Gaza would run out of available fuel to power generators in 3 days, 366. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres issued a statement urging the swift and unobstructed delivery of essential life-saving provisions, such as fuel, sustenance, and clean water, into the Gaza Strip. 367. Egypt closed the border with Gaza to civilians fleeing it. It also said that it would allow aid to be delivered through its border with Gaza, 368, and designated El Arish International Airport in the Sinai Peninsula as a hub for international humanitarian aid to Gaza, 369. On October 12, Jordan confirmed that it would send an aid airplane to Gaza, the first such flight since the start of the war. The plane was expected to land in Egypt before moving provisions to the Rafah border crossing. The aid included medical supplies. Hussein al-Shibli, Secretary-General of the Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization, said it aims to provide hospitals and entities working in the field with medical supplies to support the people of Gaza. 370. In Israel, a Magen David Adom ambulance was reportedly taken by Palestinian militants to Gaza during their attack on 7 October. 116. The Barzillai Medical Center in Ashkelon was struck by a rocket on 8 October. 110. Rockets from Gaza struck a hospital in Ashkelon on 11 October. 371. Approximately 26,000 Israelis from the settlements near Gaza Strip were displaced due to the conflict. 34. Economics. The Israeli Energy Ministry ordered Chevron to temporarily shut down the offshore Tamar gas field. 372. On October 8, Israel's TA-35 index fell by 6.47%, its largest loss since 2020. The value of the new Israeli shekel fell by 1.63% to trade at 3.90 against the US dollar, its weakest showing in 7 years. In response, the Bank of Israel announced on October 9 that it would sell up to $30 billion in foreign reserves to support and provide up to $15 billion in liquidity to the market through swap mechanisms. 373. This was the Israeli Central Bank's first ever sale of foreign exchange. 374. War crimes by Palestinian militant groups. Further information: Re'ai Music Festival Massacre, Netiv Ha'asar Attack, Be'eri Massacre, and Kfar Aza Massacre. See also, Palestinian political violence. According to The Economist, there is a consensus among scholars of international law that the actions of the Palestinian militant groups constitute war crimes. 375. According to Human Rights Watch, Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups infiltrated homes, shot civilians en masse, and took scores of Israeli civilians as hostages into Gaza. It said that the deliberate targeting of civilians, indiscriminate attacks, and taking of civilians as hostages amount to war crimes under international humanitarian law. 376. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International stated that Palestinian militants targeted Israeli civilians. 376. 377. These actions have been described by legal experts as constituting war crimes, and likely crimes against humanity. 378. 379. The attack by Palestinian groups has been categorized by Israel's UN envoy as a war crime. 380. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem called Hamas's killing of civilians and taking of hostages war crimes. 381. On October 9, the Israeli defense minister stated that he had ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, saying electricity, food, fuel and water would be cut off. 51. On October 10, the Palestinian envoy to the UN denounced the bombardment of Gaza and the announced siege, stating that such acts constitute war crimes. 382. On October 11, the Israeli power plant that supplies most of Gaza's power was shut down, with Israel barring the entry of fuel, food, water, and medicine into Gaza. 383. Human Rights Watch. 384. Amnesty International. 376. B'Tselem. 381. Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, and other groups have criticized the Israeli government's conduct during the war to varying extents. 385. 386. Al-Mezan, Al-Haq, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights have issued a joint statement where they strongly condemn Israel's widespread and systematic targeting of civilians in the Gaza Strip, which may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. 387. Amnesty International's Secretary-General Agnes Callamard said that Israeli authorities must immediately restore Gaza's electricity supply and suspend the increased restrictions imposed as a result of the Minister of Defense's order and lift its illegal 16-year blockade on the Gaza Strip. The collective punishment of Gaza's civilian population amounts to a war crime. It is cruel and inhumane. 388. For years, many human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, had urged Israel to allow freedom of movement between the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Israel. 85. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International's Crisis Evidence Lab have reported that Israeli military units striking Gaza have employed white phosphorus artillery rounds. Israel denied the report despite photo evidence. 389, 390, 391, 392. International law forbids the use of white phosphorus munitions in populated areas. 389. According to The Economist, there is a lack of consensus on whether Israel's conduct constitute war crimes. 375. They write that in practice, though, international law and the specific rules that govern warfare, the law of armed conflict, LOAC, also known as international humanitarian law, IHL, give Israel considerable latitude to attack Hamas, according to legal experts. 375. However, some scholars have criticized the October 2023 Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip and to tell 1.1 million civilians living in the northern part of Gaza to move south. Hamas called on civilians to ignore the call. The grave humanitarian consequences of this decision are not in doubt. Gaza's infrastructure is in ruins and there are few places for so many people to go. 375. Statements by governmental figures and polities. The International Criminal Court issued a statement on October 10 confirming that its 2014 mandate to investigate alleged war crimes committed in the state of Palestine extends to the current conflict. 393, 394. The UN Human Rights Council said it had clear evidence of war crimes by both sides. 394. A UN commission to the Israel-Palestine conflict stated on October 10 that there is clear evidence that war crimes may have been committed in the latest explosion of violence in Israel and Gaza, and all those who have violated international law and targeted civilians must be held accountable. 395, 396. On October 12, independent United Nations experts, p. condemned the horrific crimes committed by Hamas and said that Israel had resorted to indiscriminate military attacks against the already exhausted Palestinian people of Gaza. They said that this amounts to collective punishment. There is no justification for violence that indiscriminately targets innocent civilians, whether by Hamas or Israeli forces. This is absolutely prohibited under international law and amounts to a war crime. 397, 55. The UN Human Rights Council stated that it was gravely concerned with Israel's latest attack on Gaza. 394, 396. After Israel ordered millions of Palestinians to leave northern Gaza within 24 hours, Paula Gaviria-Betancourt, UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Internally Displaced Persons, condemned the forcible evacuation order as a crime against humanity and a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. 398. On October 9, Reuters reported that Qatar was mediating talks between Israel and Hamas to secure the release of female Israeli hostages in exchange for Israel releasing 36 Palestinian women and children. 399. However, Israel had not confirmed such negotiations were taking place. 399. An Egyptian official told the Associated Press that Israel sought Egyptian assistance to ensure the safety of hostages held by Palestinian militants, and that Egypt's intelligence chief contacted Hamas and Islamic Jihad to seek information. 231. Egyptian officials were reportedly mediating the release of Palestinian women in Israeli prisons in exchange for Israeli women captured by Palestinian militants. 161. Reactions. Reactions in Israel. Volunteers organizing deliveries for soldiers in Nesher, a center for collecting equipment for the residents of the South, Tel Aviv-Yafo. Support sign for the citizens of South and IDF soldiers at the policeperson roundabout in Ra'anana, October 2023. Following the Hamas attack on Israel, the protest group Kaplan Force cancelled its protest against the Israeli judicial reform scheduled on October 7, extending support to the IDF amidst the crisis. 400. Other protest groups like Forum 555 and Brothers in Arms also urged reservists to serve if called up. 109. Amidst the escalating violence, Megan David Adam initiated a blood donation drive and the Education Ministry closed schools on October 7, transitioning to online learning from 15 October. 401. Various events and performances were cancelled or postponed including the Haifa International Film Festival, a Bruno Mars concert, and football matches scheduled by UEFA. 402. Investigations were initiated into the failure of Israeli authorities to prevent the attack, with criticism targeted towards Prime Minister Netanyahu for his inability to foresee and prevent the crisis. 403, 404, 405. To support the war effort, El Al announced special flights to retrieve vital personnel from New York City and Bangkok on 13 October. 406. Schools advised parents to have certain social media apps deleted from their children's phones to shield them from violent war-related media. 407. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi acknowledged military failures in preventing the attacks on 12 October. 408. Emergency Unity Government. Main article, Israeli War Cabinet. Among opposition parties, Yesh Atid leader and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, National Unity Chairman Benny Gantz, Yisrael Beitina Party leader Avigdor Lieberman and Labour Party leader Merav Micheli issued a joint statement expressing full backing for the IDF and unity with the government, saying, "In times like these, there is no opposition and coalition in Israel." 409, 410. Netanyahu proposed that Yesh Atid and National Unity enter an emergency unity government with his Likud-led coalition. 411, after Lapid urged Netanyahu to put aside our differences and form an emergency, narrow, professional government. 412. Lapid said that Israel could not effectively manage the war with the extreme and dysfunctional composition of the current cabinet and called upon Netanyahu to eject the far-right religious Zionist Party and Otzma Yehudit parties as a condition for Yesh Atid to join an emergency unity government. 412. The National Unity Party met with Likud on October 9 to discuss a possible unity government. 413. On October 11, an emergency unity government was formally announced between Likud and National Unity following a joint statement from the latter party, with Benny Gantz, a former defense minister and military chief of staff, joining a war cabinet also consisting of Netanyahu as prime minister and Yoav Gallant as defense minister. The statement said the unity government would not promote any policy or laws except those related to the ongoing fighting with Hamas. 414. The war cabinet was approved by the Knesset on 12 October. 415. It significantly reduces the influence of Netanyahu's previous far-right coalition partners over the conduct of the war, which was one of Gantz's demands. 416. Haaretz reported that former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer would join the war cabinet as observers. 414. The Palestinian Education Ministry said schools in the Gaza Strip were closed until further notice. 114. The Palestinian Health Ministry appealed for blood donations. 110. Some of the hostages taken by Hamas were publicly displayed in Gaza to displays of public support. Shani Luke, a German citizen captured from the Supernova Music Festival, was paraded by Hamas face down and stripped to her underwear on the back of a truck. People in the celebrating crowd shouted Allah Akbar and some, including a youth, spit on Luke. 417, 418. In another instance, an 85-year-old woman taken hostage was driven through the streets in a golf cart while the crowd cheered. 419, 420. Hamas deputy leader Salah al-Arauri told Al Jazeera that its forces had taken enough Israeli hostages to secure the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israel in an exchange. 421. Hamas spokesperson Abu Obaida said it was holding captured Israeli soldiers in safe places and tunnels. 110. Hamas official Bassem Naim denied that his group had killed any civilians, saying that only Israeli soldiers were killed. 422. A spokesperson for Palestinian Islamic Jihad stated that they did not consider Israeli citizens to be civilians. "We are not killing civilians. This is a military society. They are the ones who elect their governments." 423. Hamas stated that it had abducted Israelis to secure the freedom of Palestinian prisoners. 128, 110, which are currently estimated to number between 4,499 to 5,200. Including 170 children. 421. Prisoner exchanges have long been practiced in the Arab-Israeli conflict. 424. In 2006, Hamas captured Gilad Shalit, forcing Israel to release 1,000 Palestinians, some of whom had been convicted by Israel of terrorism. 425. As part of a prisoner swap. 426. On October 13, the spokesperson for Palestine's Interior Ministry said Israel was lying when saying they are targeting resistance, Hamas, infrastructure and that everyone in Gaza is a target. 427. Gaza City's mayor Yahya al-Sarraj urged the international community to support the victims, support the Palestinians, saying that the Israeli blockade is against the international law. In an interview, 428. Hamas held a press conference claiming its aim was to attack Israeli military bases and instructions were given to not target civilians. 429, 430. West Bank. At an emergency meeting with officials of the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said that Palestinians had the right to defend themselves against the terror of settlers and occupation troops. 431, he later said that orders by Israel for residents to evacuate North Gaza would constitute a second Nakba. 432. Following the attack, celebrations occurred in Ramallah. Neighborhood watches were established in 50 locations amid fears of reprisals by Israeli settlers, while a general strike was called for 8 October. 111, 7 Palestinians were killed in clashes with Israeli forces on 7 October, 433, while 126 others were injured. 111, clashes on October 8 killed 6 more Palestinians. 161. Hours after Hamas's attack, U.S. President Joe Biden promised rock-solid and unwavering support to Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in an interview with ABC News, condemned Hamas's massive terrorist attack and stated, "We have immediately engaged our Israeli partners and allies." President Joe Biden was on the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu early yesterday to assure him of our full support. 434, 435, as Israel prepares to launch a possible ground invasion of Gaza, the Biden administration and leading members of Congress are preparing an aid package from the United States with about $2 billion in additional funding to support Israel, according to Time. 436, on October 12, Blinken went to Israel and met with its leaders as part of a visit that included upcoming meetings with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and King Abdullah II of Jordan. 206. Germany sent 2 Heron TP drones to Israel. 437, 438. The United Kingdom announced it would be deploying a Royal Navy Littoral Response Group consisting of 2 amphibious warfare ships, as well as P-8 Poseidon anti-submarine warfare aircraft in a show of support to Israel. 439. Jewish diaspora. From the left, pro-Palestinian protest in Istanbul, Turkey pro-Israeli protest in Berlin, Germany. Throughout the world, Jewish communities, synagogues and Jewish institutions gathered for events of unity and solidarity with the Israeli people. 440, 441, 442, 443, 444, 445, around 9,000 people in Sydney attended a vigil in solidarity with Israel, its citizens, and the worldwide Jewish diaspora. 446. Yeshiva University, a flagship Jewish university in the United States, held a night of song, prayer and unity, which included speeches from the university's president Rabbi Ari Berman, a dual American-Israeli citizen whose son was enlisted to join the war effort, and Rabbi Herschel Schachter, the head of Yeshiva. 447, 448. These events came in the wake of a drastic rise in anti-Semitic incidents across Europe and concern over the well-being of North American Jews. 449, 450, 451, in response to statements of support for Palestine from student groups at 20 prominent American universities, including Yale University and Harvard University, Berman called on university presidents to issue moral clarity in what he called a battle against evil and terrorism. 452. Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, speaking to Jewish leaders at the White House, said we witnessed a mass murder of innocent civilians. 453, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders said that the targeting of civilians is a war crime, no matter who does it, and called Israel's siege on Gaza a serious violation of international law. 454, writing for The Atlantic, and Applebaum critiqued how open brutality has again become celebrated in international conflict. 455. British-American journalist Sasha Abrams-Skye wrote for The Nation about the importance of condemning the atrocities of both Hamas's massacre of civilians and Israel's oppression of Palestinians. 456. Argentina's Jewish community, the largest Jewish population in Latin America, strongly condemned Hamas's attacks on Israel. 457. Fears for Jewish safety in the diaspora were escalated by the call for a global day of jihad by former Hamas leader Khaled Mashal, calling on Muslims to take to the streets and deliver a message of anger. 458, 459, 460. Anti-Semitic discrimination was also reported, and in Stanford University a lecturer forced Jewish students to physically go to the back of class, justified the actions of Hamas, called Jews colonizers and downplayed the Holocaust. 461. Based in Qatar, former Hamas leader Khaled Mashal called on Muslims worldwide to take to the streets and deliver a message of anger. 458. He also urged Muslims in neighboring countries like Jordan, Syria, Lebanon and Egypt to join the fight against Israel. 458. U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, came under attack for saying she grieved the loss of Palestinian and Israeli lives without explicitly condemning Hamas. In her statement, Tlaib criticized the Israeli government and called for an end to the occupation and an apartheid system for Palestinians. 462, 463, American Palestinian model Gigi Hadid wrote on Instagram, "While I have hopes and dreams for Palestinians, none of them include the harm of a Jewish person. The terrorizing of innocent people is not in alignment with and does not do any good for the Free Palestine movement. The idea that it does has fueled a painful, decades-long cycle of back-and-forth retaliation." 464. Palestinians in the diaspora also spoke out about the asymmetrical balance of power they experienced under Israeli oppression, which led to complex feelings after the massacres committed by Hamas. Paris-based Palestinian writer Karim Khaton wrote for Le Monde, "The feelings that are shaking us are intense, trying and contradictory. If we want to make some sense of what's happening to us, we must also be willing to understand the effect that the image of a bulldozer tearing down part of the apartheid wall, or of an overturned tank, can have on a Palestinian. Understanding this in no way implies that we rejoice in the exactions committed by Hamas that followed, and of which we are all collective victims, even if, of course, these images are an integral part of it." 465. Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele compared Hamas to gangs in his country and said, "As a Salvadoran with Palestinian ancestry, I'm sure the best thing that could happen to the Palestinian people is for Hamas to completely disappear. Anyone who supports the Palestinian cause would make a great mistake siding with those criminals." 457. Chile's Palestinian community, one of the largest Palestinian populations outside of the Middle East, called for a peaceful solution with full respect for international law and human rights. 457. Muslim world. Reaction from the Arab and Muslim world has generally been muted and confined to press statements. Hezbollah has offered token support to Hamas by providing some shelling and rocket attacks. However, most of this has taken place in the Sheba Farms, a small disputed parcel of land that has experienced low-level conflict since 2000. Israel's relations with the Abraham Accord countries have continued despite the conflict. 466. Several Arab countries offered to send medical aid to Gaza via the border with Egypt. Egypt, despite having been pressed by the United States, refused to accept refugees from Gaza, both for fear of security issues since Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups shares tie with militants in the Sinai, as well as for fear that a temporary refugee situation may turn permanent. 467. Countries such as the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia, who have either normalized relations with Israel or are on the path towards it, urged for a cessation of hostilities. However, some Arab League countries, such as Oman, Yemen, Qatar, and non-Arab countries like Iran and Pakistan, 468, 469, expressed official support for the Palestinians, blaming the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories for the escalation of violence. 68, 470, the Arab League itself, as well Bahrain, and Egypt have called for an immediate halt to military operations to prevent further escalation. 68. The Iranian Foreign Ministry praised the military operations as a spontaneous movement of Palestinian resistance. 471, 472, 473, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, said he was proud of the militants. 474. Hamas spokesman Ghazi Hamad told the BBC that Hamas had direct backing for the attack from Iran. Wink with a frown. 475, 476, and European and Syrian officers corroborated Iran's involvement. 477, while senior Hamas official Mahmoud Murdawi said the group planned the attacks on its own. 478. Demonstrations took place in Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Turkey, 479, Malaysia, 480, Egypt, 481, Algeria, 482, Iran, Pakistan and Indonesia in solidarity with the Palestinian groups, 483. International leaders, including from Argentina, 484, India, 485, 486, the United States, and European countries condemned the attacks by Hamas, expressed solidarity with Israel, and said Israel has a right to defend itself from armed attacks and describing Hamas's tactics as terrorism, 65, 184. Most Latin American governments condemned Hamas's attacks in Israel, while some expressed solidarity with Palestinians such as Colombia, 457. In a White House briefing, Biden expressed solidarity with Israel, 487, 488. The European Union announced it would review aid to Palestinian authorities to ensure the aid was not funding terrorism, and that no current aid payments were planned, 489, 490. Austria, Germany, and Sweden suspended humanitarian aid to Palestine in response to Hamas's attack and said that they would review other projects and aid given, 491, 492, 493. The World Uyghur Congress released a statement condemning horrific attacks by Hamas against Israeli civilians. 494. Croatia's President Zoran Milanovic publicly stated that Israel had lost his sympathy due to its humanitarian crimes and reprisal actions in Gaza, 495. Responses from African governments varied, showing division about the source of the conflict and who is to blame. However, most expressed grief and deep concerns about the outbreak of violence, with condemnations of attacks against civilians and calls for restraint and de-escalation to prevent further loss of Israeli and Palestinian lives, 496. As many as 20,000 Thai workers, around half of Israel's migrant workforce, live all over Israel, including areas close to Gaza, 497. Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said their stance towards the deadly Hamas-led attack against Israel is one of neutrality, and the kingdom promotes a solution that would allow Palestine and Israel to coexist. 498. Many countries hosted demonstrations both in solidarity with Israel and in solidarity with Palestinian peoples. Argentina, 484, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Spain, France, and Uruguay stated that they would increase security in Jewish-associated sites in response to the attack, 499, 500, 149, 501. French authorities reported more than 100 anti-Semitic incidents across the country following the conflict, and provided additional security to National Assembly President Yael Braun-Pivet and MP Meir Habib after death threats relating to the conflict were made against them. 502. France issued a ban on all demonstrations in support of Palestine, citing fears over public safety. Despite the prohibition, almost 3,000-strong pro-Palestinian demonstrators demonstrated at Place de la République in Paris, with the police making 10 arrests and dispersing the crowd with water cannons. 503. Supporters of both Palestine and Israel were on the streets of London to hold rallies and demonstrations. 504. In response to comparisons between the actions of Hamas and that of the Israeli army, several governments defended Israel's actions. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, stated that Israel has the right to do everything it can to get those hostages back safe and sound. Hamas, alone, bears responsibility for the crisis. 505. American National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby stated, "We're going to be careful not to get into armchair quarterbacking the tactics on the ground. What I can tell you is we understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to move civilians out of harm's way and giving them fair warning." 506. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre stated that it represented a false equivalence and that the condemnation belongs squarely with terrorists and that there are not two sides here. 507. On October 8, the United Nations Security Council held a closed-door meeting for 90 minutes on the conflict. The meeting concluded without the unanimity required for a joint statement to be released. 508. Brazil announced a rescue operation of nationals using an Air Force transport aircraft. 509. Poland announced that it would deploy two C-130 transport planes to evacuate 200 of its nationals from Ben Gurion Airport. 510. Hungary evacuated 215 of its nationals from Israel using two aircraft on October 9, while Romania evacuated 245 of its citizens, including two pilgrimage groups, on two Tarim planes and two private aircraft on the same day. 511. Australia also announced repatriation flights. 512. 300 Nigerian pilgrims in Israel fled to Jordan before being airlifted home. 513. On October 10, Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, stated, "Some of the actions, by Israel, and the United Nations has already said it cutting water, cutting electricity, cutting food to a mass of civilian people, is against international law. So yes, there are some actions that are not in accordance with international law." 514. On October 12, the United Kingdom arranged flights for its citizens in Israel. The first plane departed Ben Gurion Airport that day. The government had said before that there wouldn't be evacuating its nationals due to available commercial flights. However, the flights were commercial. 515. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Tel Aviv, Israel, October 12, 2023. Disinformation. This section is an excerpt from Disinformation in the 2023 Israel-Hamas War, edit. Disinformation in the 2023 Israel-Hamas war has been wide-ranging, with the dissemination of false, misleading or unsubstantiated information on both sides in the conflict. Much of the content has been viral in nature, with tens of millions of posts in circulation on social media. Some misinformation has also been widely distributed in mainstream media and repeated by heads of state. Unconfirmed reports. Unverified information has been quickly published and spread during the conflict, through social media, politicians, and mainstream news outlets. While some stories have had follow-up information that clarifies or adds context to the original posted story, it has taken time due to the widespread conflict and lack of returning audience to read or hear the additional information. 516. Reports of Hamas beheading babies were reported by a range of news organizations on October 10, after an I-24 News reporter interviewed members of the Israel Defense Force, at the scene of the Kfar Aza massacre, who reported seeing babies whose heads had been cut off. 517. CBS News later interviewed Yossi Landau, regional head of the first responder organization Zaka, who claimed that both babies and minors had been beheaded alongside corpses of dismembered adults. 518. The IDF stated to Insider that they would not investigate the allegation further, citing that it would be disrespectful for the dead to do so. 519. The government of Israel later posted photos of dead babies that they said were killed in the attack. The Jerusalem Post stated that these images confirmed that babies were decapitated. 521, while NBC News stated that no photographic evidence that babies were decapitated was provided. 522, U.S. President Joe Biden said that he had seen photographic evidence of terrorists beheading children, though a White House spokesperson later clarified that he was referring to media reports and statements by Netanyahu. 522, comments from Israeli officials and media have walked back or softened on the claims. 522, CNN reported that it could not confirm claims that children were beheaded. 523. Rape and sexual violence against Israeli women were reported, notably during the Re'im Music Festival massacre. 524, reports in Tablet. 525, Ynet. 526, PBS NewsHour. 527, India Today. 528, The Hindustan Times. 529, and the Jewish Telegraphic Agency were sourced to named and anonymous eyewitnesses present at the massacre. 526, an October 8 report by the Times of Israel referenced videos it said have raised concerns of sexual assault against women. 530, 526, 531, however, as of October 11, Yuval Shani wrote it was too soon to know whether there had been a pattern of sexual assault, as there had not yet been time to formally take testimonies from victims and witnesses. 526, these reports of sexual violence were repeated by Israeli officials, U.S. President Biden, and UK Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. 532, Jewish American news media organization The Forward said on October 11, Biden, Netanyahu, celebrities and columnists have rushed to condemn rape, but the IDF does not yet have any evidence it happened. 526, factcheck.org concluded there are no publicly confirmed examples of sexual assault. 531. On October 14, Israel's military forensic teams attested that there were indications of torture and multiple rapes among the deceased. In addition, one reserve warrant officer among them attested that the forensic teams had seen dismembered bodies with their arms and feet chopped off, people that were beheaded, and a child that was beheaded. 533. Analysis. This section has multiple issues. Please help improve it or discuss these issues on the talk page. Learn how and when to remove these template messages. This section possibly contains original research. It synthesizes several sources to argue there was an opinion change, whereas those sources themselves don't say that. October 2023. This section may contain material unrelated or insufficiently related to the topic of the article. October 2023. The neutrality of this section is disputed. October 2023. The initial attack marked a notable escalation in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, standing out for the scale and reach of both rocket fire and border attacks around Gaza. This was a significant departure from prior conflicts, which typically followed a phased progression with a gradual escalation of tensions. 534. It has been compared to the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. 535. The 1968 Tet Offensive, 1973 Yom Kippur War, the September 11, 2001 attacks, 536, and the 2003 Ramadan Offensive, 537, 538, 539, like the Tet Offensive, Hamas's attack came on the morning of a holiday, seemed to be everywhere at once, and demonstrated capabilities not thought possible in a guerrilla force. 540. Effect on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The war was widely seen as the de facto end of the two-state solution as a possible resolution to the conflict, perhaps indefinitely. 541. Several commentators suggested alternative plans, including Frowny Face 542. A return state solution which generally returns both the Gaza Strip to Egypt and the West Bank to Jordan. A plan that was before the war advocated by Ian Bremmer, 543, Hassan Ismaik, 544, and others. 542. A one-state solution with a merged, singular Israeli-Palestinian polity. Supported by many liberals in international relations. 542. A one-state solution that involves an Israeli-Palestinian confederation where both polities share powers in some areas and Israelis and Palestinians have residency rights in each other's nations. Supported by many liberals in international relations. 545. A three-state solution that involves Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank all becoming independent polities. Supported by many realists and international realists, notable supporters include Noah Smith, Kaveh Afrasiabi, Jacob Savage, and Benjamin Kirstein. 542. Effect on Palestinian factions. According to Daniel Byman and Alexander Palmer, the attack showcased the decline of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and the rise of Hamas as a power center in Palestinian politics. They predicted the PLO's further decline if the status quo held. 101. Laith Al-Ajluni wrote that the immediate effect of the Hamas offensive was to unite Hamas and PLO. However, it may soon lead to conflict between them, possibly leading the PLO losing control of the security situation in the West Bank, if more militant groups there begin to launch their own independent attacks. 546. With global attention on Hamas, Emil Hokayyem wrote that Turkey and Qatar, which have privileged relations with Hamas, may be accused of overly indulging Hamas and being tarnished by association. 546. John Rain wrote that Hamas risks being decimated by the Israeli response, in which case Iran and Hezbollah would have to decide how to respond to requests for military intervention. 546. Context of the Israeli occupation. 6,407 Palestinians killed before this war. Most were civilians. 547, 548. 308 Israelis killed before this war. Most were civilians. 547, 548. Analysts stressed that the Palestinian attacks came in the context of the Israeli occupation. 549. Stephen M. Walt wrote that Palestinians feel they have no choice but to use force in response to Israel's decades-long treatment of Palestinians. 550. The Hindu wrote that the Israeli occupation was the longest in modern history and created a fuming volcano. 551. The Associated Press wrote that Palestinians are in despair over a never-ending occupation in the West Bank and suffocating blockade of Gaza. 552. ABC News reported the August 2023 UNRWA figures for Gaza of 81% of people living below the poverty level, and 63% being food insecure and dependent on international assistance. ABC News also reported the UNOCHA point numbers of roughly 6,400 Palestinians and 300 Israelis killed in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict since 2008 through September 2023. Before this war, 548, 553, 547. Roger Cohen wrote that the increasing Israeli control over millions of Palestinians incubated bloodshed. 554. Prior to the attack, Saudi Arabia had warned Israel of an explosion as a result of the continued occupation. 555. Egypt had warned of a catastrophe unless there was political progress. 556. And similar warnings were given by Palestinian Authority officials. 556. Less than 2 months before the attacks, King Abdullah II of Jordan lamented that Palestinians have no civil rights, no freedom of mobility. 556. Cohen wrote that many Israelis assumed the Palestinian question had become a non-issue, and it had disappeared from the global agenda. 554. Simon Tisdall pointed to the uptick in Israeli-Palestinian violence in 2023 as portending war. Claimed that Netanyahu refused to negotiate the peace process, adding fuel to the fire. 557. And the rights of Palestinians were ignored. 557. Youssef Munir wrote that the Biden administration had ignored the Palestinian issue. 558. As late as September 29, Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, proclaimed that the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. 558. According to an analysis in The Independent, the blockade on Gaza created hopelessness among Palestinians, which was exploited by Hamas, convincing young Palestinian men that violence was the only solution. 559. Daoud Kuttab writes that Palestinian attempts to solve the conflict via negotiations or nonviolent boycotts have been fruitless. 556. For the Times of Israel, Tal Schneider wrote, "For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state." 560. Israeli intelligence failure. Political journalist Peter Beaumont described the attack as an intelligence failure for the ages on the part of the Israeli government. 561. The Jewish News Syndicate deemed it a failure of imagination. 562. A BBC report on the intelligence failure noted that it must have taken extraordinary levels of operational security by Hamas. 563. U.S. officials expressed shock at how Israeli intelligence appeared to be unaware of any preparations by Hamas. 564. Israeli officials later anonymously reported to Axios that the IDF and Shin Bet had detected abnormal movements by Hamas the day before the attack, but decided to wait for additional intelligence before raising the military's alert level. They also did not inform political leaders of the intelligence reports. 565. Amir Avivi, former deputy commander of the Gaza division of Israel's military, told the Financial Times it was a failure that is no smaller than the Yom Kippur War. 566. Yaakov Amidror, a former national security advisor to Netanyahu, said the attack proved their intelligence abilities in Gaza were no good. An unnamed Egyptian intelligence official told the Associated Press that Egypt warned them an explosion of the situation is coming, and very soon, and it would be big. But they underestimated such warnings. 567. This story was corroborated by Michael McCaul, chairman of the U.S. House Foreign Relations Committee, who said the warnings were made 3 days before the attack. 568. Sources in Hamas and Israel's military establishment told Reuters the attack was the culmination of a years-long campaign by Hamas to deceive Israel into thinking that the group was primarily interested in economic and governance issues instead of fighting. 61. An IDF colonel anonymously told Middle East Eye that intelligence units had detected Hamas training activities but misjudged their intent. They assessed these would be used in a series of separate attacks, rather than a large combined one. 569. On October 11, Ynet reported that Egypt's director of the General Intelligence Directorate, Abbas Kamel, made a personal phone call to Netanyahu 10 days prior to the initial attack, warning that individuals in Gaza were expected to do something unusual, a terrible operation. 570. Former MI6 chief Sir Alex Younger voiced his opinion that Hamas fighters were able to carry out their attack due to institutional complacency in Israel. 571, Netanyahu described the reports as absolutely false and fake news. 571, 570. Effect on the Netanyahu government. Amit Siegel, chief political commentator for Israel's Channel 12, said that the conflict would test Benjamin Netanyahu's survival as prime minister, noting that past wars had toppled the governments of several of his predecessors, such as that of Golda Meir following the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Menachem Begin following the 1982 Lebanon War, and Ehud Olmert following the 2006 Lebanon War. 572. Prior to the formation of an emergency unity government on October 11, Politico described the then potential move as Netanyahu's opportunity to correct his course and save his political legacy. 573, citing the Israeli intelligence failure, which some observers attributed to the incumbent government focusing more on internal dissent, the judicial reform, and efforts to deepen Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. 574. Some commentators criticized Netanyahu for putting aside the PLO and propping up Hamas. 560, and described him as a liability. 557. Effect on Israeli-Saudi Arabian normalization. In an analysis by the Times of Israel, the newspaper wrote that Hamas has violently shifted the world's eyes back to the Palestinians and dealt a severe blow to the momentum for securing a landmark U.S. brokered deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. 575. The New York Times reported that the prospects of Israeli and Saudi normalization appeared dimmer, citing Saudi Arabia's statement that the country had repeatedly warned of the dangers of the explosion of the situation as a result of the continued occupation, the deprivation of the Palestinian people and their legitimate rights, and the repetition of systemic provocations against its sanctities. 555, 576. Andreas Kluth wrote in his Bloomberg News column that Hamas torched Biden's deal to remake the Middle East, arguing that the deal that was being discussed between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States would have left Palestinians in the cold, so the group decided to blow the whole thing up. He added that, viewed from Gaza, things were only going to get worse, considering that Netanyahu's coalition partners opposed a two-state solution for the conflict. He suggested they would prefer to annex the entirety of the West Bank, even at the expense of turning Israel into an apartheid state, something critics have long claimed as Israel's goal. 577. Speculation arose that Iran was trying to sabotage relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. 578. With former head of research for Shin Bet Naomi Newman saying the attack could have been timed in part due to Iran's hopes to scuttle efforts to normalize relations between Israel and its Sunni rival. 579. On October 9, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Nasser Kanani denied claims of Tehran's involvement in Hamas's attack. 580. Regional spillover threats. Main article, Iran-Israel proxy conflict. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, speculated the war would spread to Jerusalem and the West Bank. 581. Hashim Safi al-Din, head of Hezbollah's executive council, echoed these sentiments. 582. Max Abrams, a political scientist at Northeastern University, opined that the conflict could escalate into a war between Israel and Iran. 583. Effect on the Russo-Ukrainian War. See also, Russia and the Iran-Israel proxy conflict, Israel-Russia relations, and Israel-Ukraine relations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of seeking to precipitate conflict in the Middle East to undermine world unity, increase discord and contradictions, and thus help Russia destroy freedom in Europe. 584. 585. Russian President Vladimir Putin declared the war a clear example of the failure of United States policy in the Middle East, adding that Washington had consistently failed to take into account the fundamental interests of Palestinians. Russian commentators close to the Kremlin characterized the war as a military and intelligence failure of the West, predicting it would sap Western support for Ukraine. The New York Times stated that Russia's relations with Israel were deteriorating, driven in part by Western support for Ukraine and Iran's continued support for Russia in the Russo-Ukrainian War. 586. Politico wrote that it was a foregone conclusion that the war would divert U.S. attention from Ukraine. 587. The Ukrainian main Directorate of Intelligence accused Russia of transferring Western-made weapons captured in Ukraine to Hamas in order to blame Ukraine for selling them. 588. See also. Timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in 2023. Outline of the 2023 Israel-Hamas war. List of wars involving Israel. List of wars involving the State of Palestine. The Gaza Strip, /c/wink with a frown 3, Arabic, Ki Gaza, Gts.za, or simply Gaza, is a narrow piece of land located on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, 4, bordered by Israel to the east and north, and Egypt to the southwest. With a population of 2,000,005, on some 365 square kilometers, Gaza, if considered a top-level political unit, ranks as the third most densely populated in the world, 6, 7, it is one of the two Palestinian territories, alongside the West Bank, 8, 9, since 2007, the area has been governed by the political and militant Islamist group Hamas, 10, and has been under blockade by both Israel and Egypt, leading human rights organizations to call it an open-air prison. 11, 12. The Gaza Strip initially emerged as an Egyptian-administrated territory after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Following the 1967 war, the territory came under Israeli occupation. In the 1990s, as part of the Oslo Accords, the administration over most of the area was handed over to the Palestinian National Authority, alongside the existence of Israeli settlements in specific regions, which were evacuated in 2005. In 2006, Hamas won the last held Palestinian legislative election, and started administering Gaza, and took full control the following year, when Israel and Egypt imposed a land, sea and air blockade, preventing the free flow of people and goods. 13. The blockade has devastated Gaza's economy, and caused a nearly 50% poverty rate. 14. And one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. 15. In 2018 to 2019, Gazan Palestinians organized widespread protests on the Israel-Gaza barrier, demanding Israel to end the blockade and address issues in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. 16. Most people in the Gaza Strip are descendants of refugees who fled or were expelled from the area that became Israel after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. 17. Around 600,000 Gazans live in Gaza's 8 refugee camps. 18. Most Gazans are Sunni Muslims, and there is a Palestinian Christian minority. Gaza has an annual population growth rate of 2.91%, 2014 EST, the 13th highest in the world, and is often referred to as overcrowded. 19. 20. Gaza suffers from shortages of water, electricity and medicines. The United Nations, as well as at least 19 human rights organizations, have urged Israel to lift its siege on Gaza. 21, 22, while a report by UNCTAD, prepared for the UN General Assembly and released on November 25, 2020, said that Gaza's economy was on the verge of collapse and that it was essential to lift the blockade. 23, 24. A map of the Gaza Strip, with borders and the Israeli limited fishing zone. Geography, geology and climate. The Gaza Strip is 41 kilometers, 25 miles long, from 6 to 12 kilometers, 3.7 to 7.5 miles wide, and has a total area of 365 square kilometers, 141 square miles. 25, 19. It has a 51 kilometers, 32 miles border with Israel, and an 11 kilometers, 7 miles border with Egypt, near the city of Rafah. Khan Yunis is located 7 kilometers, 4.3 miles, northeast of Rafah, and several towns around Deir el-Balah are located along the coast between it and Gaza City. Beit Lahia and Beit Hanoun are located to the north and northeast of Gaza City, respectively. The Gush Katif block of Israeli settlements used to exist on the sand dunes adjacent to Rafah and Khan Yunis, along the southwestern edge of the 40 kilometers, 25 miles Mediterranean coastline. Al Dara Beach is a popular venue for surfers. 26. The topography of the Gaza Strip is dominated by 3 ridges parallel to the coastline, which consist of Pleistocene-Holocene aged calcareous Aeolian, wine-deposited, sandstones, locally referred to as Kirker, intercalated with red-colored fine-grained paleosols, referred to as Hamra. The 3 ridges are separated by wadis, which are filled with alluvial deposits. 27. The terrain is flat or rolling, with dunes near the coast. The highest point is Abu Ada, Jaz Abu Ada, at 105 meters, 344 feet above sea level. The major river in Gaza Strip is Wadi Gaza, around which the Wadi Gaza Nature Reserve was established, to protect the only coastal wetland in the Strip. 28. The Gaza Strip has a hot semi-arid climate, Köppen BSH, with warm winters during which practically all the annual rainfall occurs, and dry, hot summers. Despite the dryness, humidity is high throughout the year. Annual rainfall is higher than in any part of Egypt at between 225 mm, 9 in the south and 400 mm, 16 in the north, but almost all of this falls between November and February. Environmental problems include desertification, salination of fresh water, sewage treatment, waterborne diseases, soil degradation, and depletion and contamination of underground water resources. Gaza City Skyline, 2007. Downtown Gaza, 2012. Beit Hanoun region of Gaza in August 2014, after Israeli bombardments. History. Further information, History of Gaza. Gaza was part of the Ottoman Empire before it was occupied by the United Kingdom, 1918 to 1948, Egypt, 1948 to 1967, and then Israel, which in 1993 granted the Palestinian Authority in Gaza limited self-governance through the Oslo Accords. Since 2007, the Gaza Strip has been de facto governed by Hamas, which claims to represent the State of Palestine and the Palestinian people. The United Nations, international human rights organizations, and the majority of governments and legal commentators still consider the territory to be occupied by Israel despite the 2005 Israeli disengagement from Gaza. 29. Israel maintains direct external control over Gaza and indirect control over life within Gaza. Israel controls Gaza's air and maritime space and 6 of Gaza's 7 land crossings. Israel reserves the right to enter Gaza at will with its military and maintains a no-go buffer zone within the Gaza territory. Gaza is dependent on Israel for its water, electricity, telecommunications, and other utilities. 29. The Gaza Strip's northern and eastern boundaries were established at the cessation of fighting in the 1948 war, confirmed by the Israel-Egypt Armistice Agreement on 24 February 1949. 30. Article 5 of the agreement declared that the demarcation line was not to be an international border. At first the Gaza Strip was officially administered by the All-Palestine government, established by the Arab League in September 1948. All-Palestine in the Gaza Strip was managed under the military authority of Egypt, functioning as a puppet state, until it officially merged into the United Arab Republic and dissolved in 1959. From the time of the dissolution of the All-Palestine government until 1967, the Gaza Strip was directly administered by an Egyptian military governor. Israel captured the Gaza Strip from Egypt in the Six-Day War in 1967. Pursuant to the Oslo Accords signed in 1993, the Palestinian Authority became the administrative body that governed Palestinian population centers while Israel maintained control of the airspace, territorial waters and border crossings with the exception of the land border with Egypt which is controlled by Egypt. In 2005, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip under their unilateral disengagement plan. In July 2007, after winning the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Hamas became the elected government. 31, 32. In 2007, Hamas expelled the rival party Fatah from Gaza. 33. This broke the unity government between Gaza Strip and the West Bank, creating 2 separate governments for the occupied Palestinian territories. In 2014, following reconciliation talks, Hamas and Fatah formed a Palestinian unity government within the West Bank and Gaza. Rami Hamdallah became the coalition's prime minister and had planned for elections in Gaza and the West Bank. 34. In July 2014, a set of lethal incidents between Hamas and Israel led to the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. The unity government dissolved on June 17, 2015 after President Abbas said it was unable to operate in the Gaza Strip. Following the takeover of Gaza by Hamas, the territory has been subjected to a blockade, maintained by Israel and Egypt. 35. Israel maintains that this is necessary to impede Hamas from rearming and to restrict Palestinian rocket attacks. Egypt maintains that it prevents Gaza residents from entering Egypt. The blockades by Israel and Egypt extended to drastic reductions in the availability of necessary construction materials, medical supplies, and foodstuffs following intensive airstrikes on Gaza City in December 2008. A leaked UN report in 2009 warned that the blockade was devastating livelihoods and causing gradual de-development. It pointed out that glass was prohibited by the blockade, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. Under the blockade, Gaza has been described by rights groups and critics as the world's largest open-air prison. 41, 42. In a report submitted to the UN in 2013, the chairperson of Al-Athar Global Consulting in Gaza, Riyam El-Wihady, encouraged the repair of basic infrastructure by 2020, in the light of projected demographic increase of 500,000 by 2020 and intensified housing problems. 43. Prior to 1923. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources in this section. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. October 2023, learn how and when to remove this template message. A British artillery battery in front of Gaza, 1917. The earliest major settlements in the area were at Tel el-Sakan and Tel al-Ajul, two Bronze Age settlements that served as administrative outposts for ancient Egyptian governance. The city of Gaza already existed under the Philistines, and the early city was captured by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE during his Egyptian campaign. Following the death of Alexander, Gaza, along with Egypt, fell under the administration of the Ptolemaic dynasty, before passing to the Seleucid dynasty after about 200 BCE. The city of Gaza was destroyed by the Hasmonean king and Jewish high priest Alexander Jannaeus in 96 BCE, and re-established under Roman administration during the 1st century CE. The region that today forms the Gaza Strip was moved between different Roman provinces over time, from Judea to Syria Palestina to Palestina Prima. During the 7th century CE, the territory was passed back and forth between the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire and the Persian, Sasanian empires, before the Rashidun Caliphate was established during the great Islamic expansions of the 7th century. Citation needed. During the Crusades, the city of Gaza was reported to be mostly abandoned and in ruins. The region was placed under the direct administration of the Knights Templar during the time of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It changed hands back and forth several times between Christian and Muslim rule during the 12th century. The Crusader-founded kingdom lost control permanently over it and the land became part of Egypt's Ayyubid dynasty's lands for a century, until the Mongol ruler Hulagu Khan destroyed the city. In the wake of the Mongols, the Mamluk Sultanate established control over Egypt and the eastern Levant, and controlled Gaza until the 16th century, when the Ottoman Empire absorbed the Mamluk territories. Ottoman rule continued until the years following World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Gaza formed part of the League of Nations British Mandate of Palestine. Citation needed. The British Mandate for Palestine was based on the principles contained in Article 22 of the Draft Covenant of the League of Nations and the San Remo Resolution of April 25, 1920 by the principal Allied and associated powers after the First World War. 44. The mandate formalized British rule in the southern part of Ottoman Syria from 1923 to 1948. 1948 All-Palestine Government. On September 22, 1948, towards the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the All-Palestine Government was proclaimed in the Egyptian-occupied Gaza City by the Arab League. It was conceived partly as an Arab League attempt to limit the influence of Transjordan in Palestine. The All-Palestine Government was quickly recognized by 6 of the then 7 members of the Arab League: Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, but not by Transjordan. 45. It was not recognized by any country outside the Arab League. After the cessation of hostilities, the Israel-Egypt Armistice Agreement of February 24, 1949 established the separation line between Egyptian and Israeli forces, and set what became the present boundary between the Gaza Strip and Israel. Both sides declared that the boundary was not an international border. The southern border with Egypt continued to be the international border drawn in 1906 between the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire. 46. Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip or Egypt were issued all-Palestine passports. Egypt did not offer them citizenship. From the end of 1949, they received aid directly from UNRWA. During the Suez Crisis, 1956, the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula were occupied by Israeli troops, who withdrew under international pressure. The All-Palestine Government was accused of being little more than a facade for Egyptian control, with negligible independent funding or influence. It subsequently moved to Cairo and dissolved in 1959 by decree of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. 1959 to 1967 Egyptian occupation. Main article, Occupation of the Gaza Strip by Egypt. Che Guevara visiting Gaza in 1959. After the dissolution of the All-Palestine government in 1959, under the excuse of Pan-Arabism, Egypt continued to occupy the Gaza Strip until 1967. Egypt never annexed the Gaza Strip, but instead treated it as a controlled territory and administered it through a military governor. 47. The influx of over 200,000 refugees from former Mandatory Palestine, roughly a quarter of those who fled or were expelled from their homes during, and in the aftermath of, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War into Gaza. 48. Resulted in a dramatic decrease in the standard of living. Because the Egyptian government restricted movement to and from the Gaza Strip, its inhabitants could not look elsewhere for gainful employment. 49. 1967 Israeli occupation. In June 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel Defense Forces captured the Gaza Strip. According to Tom Segev, moving the Palestinians out of the country had been a persistent element of Zionist thinking from early times. 50. In December 1967, during a meeting at which the Security Cabinet brainstormed about what to do with the Arab population of the newly occupied territories, one of the suggestions Prime Minister Levi Eshkol proffered regarding Gaza was that the people might leave if Israel restricted their access to water supplies, stating, "Perhaps if we don't give them enough water they won't have a choice." 51, 52, undue weight? Discuss, a number of measures, including financial incentives, were taken shortly afterwards to begin to encourage Gazans to emigrate elsewhere. 50, 53. Subsequent to this military victory, Israel created the first Israeli settlement block in the Strip, Gush Katif, in the southwest corner near Rafah and the Egyptian border on a spot where a small kibbutz had previously existed for 18 months between 1946 and 1948. 55. In total, between 1967 and 2005, Israel established 21 settlements in Gaza, comprising 20% of the total territory. The economic growth rate from 1967 to 1982 averaged roughly 9.7% per annum, due in good part to expanded income from work opportunities inside Israel, which had a major utility for the latter by supplying the country with a large unskilled and semi-skilled workforce. Gaza's agricultural sector was adversely affected as one-third of the Strip was appropriated by Israel, competition for scarce water resources stiffened, and the lucrative cultivation of citrus declined with the advent of Israeli policies, such as prohibitions on planting new trees and taxation that gave breaks to Israeli producers, factors which militated against growth. Gaza's direct exports of these products to Western markets, as opposed to Arab markets, was prohibited except through Israeli marketing vehicles, in order to assist Israeli citrus exports to the same markets. The overall result was that large numbers of farmers were forced out of the agricultural sector. Israel placed quotas on all goods exported from Gaza, while abolishing restrictions on the flow of Israeli goods into the Strip. Sarah Roy characterized the pattern as one of structural de-development. 56. 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. On March 26, 1979, Israel and Egypt signed the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. 57. Among other things, the treaty provided for the withdrawal by Israel of its armed forces and civilians from the Sinai Peninsula, which Israel had captured during the Six-Day War. The Egyptians agreed to keep the Sinai Peninsula demilitarized. The final status of the Gaza Strip, and other relations between Israel and Palestinians, was not dealt with in the treaty. Egypt renounced all territorial claims to territory north of the international border. The Gaza Strip remained under Israeli military administration. The Israeli military became responsible for the maintenance of civil facilities and services. After the Egyptian-Israeli Peace Treaty 1979, a 100-meter-wide buffer zone between Gaza and Egypt known as the Philadelphia Route was established. The international border along the Philadelphia Corridor between Egypt and the Gaza Strip is 7 miles (11 kilometers) long. The First Intifada began in December 1987, lasting until Madrid Conference of 1991. It was characterized by protests, civil disobedience, and violence. 58, 59, there was graffiti, barricading. 60, 61, and widespread throwing of stones and Molotov cocktails at the IDF and its infrastructure within the West Bank and Gaza Strip. These contrasted with civil efforts including general strikes, boycotts of Israeli civil administration institutions in the Gaza Strip, an economic boycott consisting of refusal to work in Israeli settlements on Israeli products, refusal to pay taxes, and refusal to drive Palestinian cars with Israeli licenses. 1994, Gaza under Palestinian Authority. In September 1992, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin told a delegation from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, "I would like Gaza to sink into the sea, but that won't happen, and a solution must be found." 62. In May 1994, following the Palestinian-Israeli agreements known as the Oslo Accords, a phased transfer of governmental authority to the Palestinians took place. Much of the Strip came under Palestinian control, except for the settlement blocks and military areas. The Israeli forces left Gaza City and other urban areas, leaving the new Palestinian Authority to administer and police those areas. The Palestinian Authority, led by Yasser Arafat, chose Gaza City as its first provincial headquarters. In September 1995, Israel and the PLO signed a second peace agreement, extending the Palestinian Authority to most West Bank towns. Between 1994 and 1996, Israel built the Israeli Gaza Strip barrier to improve security in Israel. The barrier was largely torn down by Palestinians at the beginning of the Second Intifada in September 2000. 63. A view of Gaza during the 2000s. 2000 Second Intifada. The Second Intifada broke out in September 2000 with waves of protest, civil unrest and bombings against Israeli military and civilians, many of them perpetrated by suicide bombers. The Second Intifada also marked the beginning of rocket attacks and bombings of Israeli border localities by Palestinian guerrillas from the Gaza Strip, especially by the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad movements. Between December 2000 and June 2001, the barrier between Gaza and Israel was reconstructed. A barrier on the Gaza Strip-Egypt border was constructed starting in 2004. 64. The main crossing points are the northern Erez crossing into Israel and the southern Rafah crossing into Egypt. The eastern Karni crossing used for cargo, closed down in 2011. 65. Israel controls the Gaza Strip's northern borders, as well as its territorial waters and airspace. Egypt controls Gaza Strip's southern border, under an agreement between it and Israel. 66. Neither Israel or Egypt permits free travel from Gaza as both borders are heavily militarily fortified. Egypt maintains a strict blockade on Gaza in order to isolate Hamas from Islamist insurgents in the Sinai. 67. 2005 Israel's unilateral disengagement. Main article, Israeli disengagement from Gaza. In February 2005, the Knesset approved a unilateral disengagement plan and began removing Israeli settlers from the Gaza Strip in 2005. All Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip and the joint Israeli-Palestinian Erez industrial zone were dismantled, and 9,000 Israelis, most living in Gush Katif, were forcibly evicted. Barrier fence. On September 12, 2005, the Israeli cabinet formally declared an end to Israeli military occupation of the Gaza Strip. The Oslo agreements gave Israel full control over Gaza's airspace, but established that the Palestinians could build an airport in the area, and the disengagement plan states that Israel will hold sole control of Gaza airspace and will continue to carry out military activity in the waters of the Gaza Strip. Therefore, Israel continues to maintain exclusive control of Gaza's airspace and the territorial waters, just as it has since it occupied the Gaza Strip in 1967. 68. Human Rights Watch has advised the UN Human Rights Council that it, and others, consider Israel to be the occupying power of the Gaza Strip because Israel controls Gaza Strip's airspace, territorial waters and controls the movement of people or goods in or out of Gaza by air or sea. 69, 70, 71. The EU considers Gaza to be occupied. 72. Israel also withdrew from the Philadelphia route, a narrow strip of land adjacent to the border with Egypt, after Egypt agreed to secure its side of the border. Under the Oslo Accords, the Philadelphia route was to remain under Israeli control to prevent the smuggling of weapons and people across the Egyptian border, but Egypt, under EU supervision, committed itself to patrolling the area and preventing such incidents. With the Agreement on Movement and Access, known as the Rafah Agreement, in the same year Israel ended its presence in the Philadelphia route and transferred responsibility for security arrangements to Egypt and the PA under the supervision of the EU. 73. In November 2005, an agreement on movement and access between Israel and the Palestinian Authority was brokered by then U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to improve Palestinian freedom of movement and economic activity in the Gaza Strip. Under its terms, the Rafah crossing with Egypt was to be reopened, with transits monitored by the Palestinian National Authority and the European Union. Only people with Palestinian ID, or foreign nationals, by exception, in certain categories, subject to Israeli oversight, were permitted to cross in and out. All goods, vehicles and trucks to and from Egypt passed through the Kerem Shalom crossing, under full Israeli supervision. 74. Goods were also permitted transit at the Karni crossing in the north. After the Israeli withdrawal in 2005, the Oslo Accords give the Palestinian Authority administrative authority in the Gaza Strip. The Rafah border crossing has been supervised by EU Border Assistance Mission Rafah under an agreement finalized in November 2005. 75. The Oslo Accord permits Israel to control the airspace and sea space, though the accords also stipulated the Palestinians could have their own airport inside the Strip, which Israel has since then prevented from happening. 76. Despite the 2005 Israeli disengagement from Gaza. 29. The United Nations, international human rights organizations, and the majority of governments and legal commentators consider the territory to be still occupied by Israel, supported by additional restrictions placed on Gaza by Egypt. Israel maintains direct external control over Gaza and indirect control over life within Gaza. It controls Gaza's air and maritime space, as well as 6 of Gaza's 7 land crossings. It reserves the right to enter Gaza at will with its military and maintains a no-go buffer zone within the Gaza territory. Gaza is dependent on Israel for water, electricity, telecommunications, and other utilities. 29. An extensive Israeli buffer zone within the Strip renders much land off-limits to Gaza's Palestinians. 77. The system of control imposed by Israel was described in the fall 2012 edition of International Security as an indirect occupation. 78. Post-2006 elections violence. Main article, Fatah-Hamas conflict. In the Palestinian parliamentary elections held on January 25, 2006, Hamas won a plurality of 42.9% of the total vote and 74 out of 132 total seats, 56%. 79. 80. When Hamas assumed power the next month, Israel, the United States, the European Union, Russia and the United Nations demanded that Hamas accept all previous agreements, recognize Israel's right to exist, and renounce violence. When Hamas refused, 81, they cut off direct aid to the Palestinian Authority, although some aid money was redirected to humanitarian organizations not affiliated with the government. 82, the resulting political disorder and economic stagnation led to many Palestinians emigrating from the Gaza Strip. 83. In January 2007, fighting erupted between Hamas and Fatah. The deadliest clashes occurred in the northern Gaza Strip, where General Mohammed Garib, a senior commander of the Fatah-dominated Preventive Security Force, died when a rocket hit his home. On January 30, 2007, a truce was negotiated between Fatah and Hamas. 84. After a few days, new fighting broke out. On February 1, Hamas killed 6 people in an ambush on a Gaza convoy which delivered equipment for Abbas' Palestinian Presidential Guard, according to diplomats, meant to counter smuggling of more powerful weapons into Gaza by Hamas for its fast-growing executive force. According to Hamas, the deliveries to the Presidential Guard were intended to instigate sedition against Hamas, while withholding money and assistance from the Palestinian people. 85. Fatah fighters stormed a Hamas-affiliated university in the Gaza Strip. Officers from Abbas' Presidential Guard battled Hamas gunmen guarding the Hamas-led Interior Ministry. 86. In May 2007, new fighting broke out between the factions. 87. Interior Minister Hani Kawazmi, who had been considered a moderate civil servant acceptable to both factions, resigned due to what he termed harmful behavior by both sides. 88. Fighting spread in the Gaza Strip, with both factions attacking vehicles and facilities of the other side. Following a breakdown in an Egyptian brokered truce, Israel launched an airstrike which destroyed a building used by Hamas. Ongoing violence prompted fear that it could bring the end of the Fatah-Hamas coalition government, and possibly the end of the Palestinian Authority. 89. Hamas spokesman Musa Abu Marzouk blamed the conflict between Hamas and Fatah on Israel, stating that the constant pressure of economic sanctions resulted in the real explosion. 90, Associated Press reporter Ibrahim Barzak wrote an eyewitness account stating, "Today I have seen people shot before my eyes, I heard the screams of terrified women and children in a burning building, and I argued with gunmen who wanted to take over my home. I have seen a lot in my years as a journalist in Gaza, but this is the worst it's been." From 2006 to 2007 more than 600 Palestinians were killed in fighting between Hamas and Fatah. 91, 349 Palestinians were killed in fighting between factions in 2007, 160 Palestinians killed each other in June alone. 92. Following the victory of Hamas in the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Hamas and Fatah formed the Palestinian Authority National Unity Government headed by Ismail Haniyeh. Shortly after, Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip in the course of the Battle of Gaza. 93, seizing government institutions and replacing Fatah and other government officials with its own. 94, by June 14, Hamas fully controlled the Gaza Strip. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas responded by declaring a state of emergency, dissolving the unity government and forming a new government without Hamas participation. PNA security forces in the West Bank arrested a number of Hamas members. In late June 2008, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Jordan declared the West Bank-based cabinet formed by Abbas as the sole legitimate Palestinian government. Egypt moved its embassy from Gaza to the West Bank. 95. Saudi Arabia and Egypt supported reconciliation and a new unity government and pressed Abbas to start talks with Hamas. Abbas had always conditioned this on Hamas returning control of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority. Hamas visited a number of countries, including Russia, and the EU member states. Citation needed. Vague. Opposition parties and politicians called for a dialogue with Hamas as well as an end to the economic sanctions. After the takeover, Israel and Egypt closed their border crossings with Gaza. Palestinian sources reported that European Union monitors fled the Rafah border crossing on the Gaza-Egypt border for fear of being kidnapped or harmed. 96. Arab foreign ministers and Palestinian officials presented a united front against control of the border by Hamas. 97. Meanwhile, Israeli and Egyptian security reports said that Hamas continued smuggling in large quantities of explosives and arms from Egypt through tunnels. Egyptian security forces uncovered 60 tunnels in 2007. 98. Egyptian border barrier breach. On January 23, 2008, after months of preparation during which the steel reinforcement of the border barrier was weakened. 99. Hamas destroyed several parts of the wall dividing Gaza and Egypt in the town of Rafah. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans crossed the border into Egypt seeking food and supplies. Due to the crisis, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak ordered his troops to allow the Palestinians in but to verify that they did not bring weapons back across the border. 100. Egypt arrested and later released several armed Hamas militants in the Sinai who presumably wanted to infiltrate into Israel. At the same time, Israel increased its state of alert along the length of the Israel-Egypt-Sinai border, and warned its citizens to leave Sinai without delay. The EU border monitors initially monitored the border because Hamas guaranteed their safety, but they later fled. The Palestinian Authority demanded that Egypt deal only with the authority in negotiations relating to borders. Israel eased restrictions on the delivery of goods and medical supplies but curtailed electricity by 5% in one of its 10 lines. 101. The Rafah crossing remained closed into mid-February. 102. In February 2008 Israel-Gaza conflict intensified, with rockets launched at Israeli cities. Aggression by Hamas led to Israeli military action on March 1, 2008, resulting in over 110 Palestinians being killed according to BBC News, as well as 2 Israeli soldiers. Israeli human rights group Tselem estimated that 45 of those killed were not involved in hostilities, and 15 were minors. 103. After a round of tit-for-tat arrests between Fatah and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and West Bank, the Hillis clan from Gaza were relocated to Jericho on 4 August 2008. 104. Retiring Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said on November 11, 2008, "The question is not whether there will be a confrontation, but when it will take place, under what circumstances, and who will control these circumstances, who will dictate them, and who will know to exploit the time from the beginning of the ceasefire until the moment of confrontation in the best possible way." On November 14, 2008, Israel blockaded its border with Gaza after a 5-month ceasefire broke down. 105. In 2013, Israel and Qatar brought Gaza's lone power plant back to life for the first time in 7 weeks, bringing relief to the Palestinian coastal enclave where a lack of cheap fuel has contributed to the overflow of raw sewage, 21-hour blackouts and flooding after a ferocious winter storm. Palestinian officials said that a $10 million grant from Qatar was covering the cost of 2 weeks' worth of industrial diesel that started entering Gaza by truckload from Israel. 106. On November 25, 2008, Israel closed its cargo crossing with Gaza after Qassam rockets were fired into its territory. 107. On November 28, after a 24-hour period of quiet, the IDF facilitated the transfer of over 30 truckloads of food, basic supplies and medicine into Gaza and transferred fuel to the area's main power plant. 108. 2008 to 2009 Gaza War. Main article, Gaza War, 2008 to 2009. Buildings damaged during Operation Cast Lead. Monthly rocket and mortar hits in Israel, 2008. Israelis killed by Palestinians in Israel, blue, and Palestinians killed by Israelis in Gaza, red. On 27 December 2008, 109, Israeli F-16 fighters launched a series of airstrikes against targets in Gaza following the breakdown of a temporary truce between Israel and Hamas. 110, Israel began a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip on 3 January 2009. 111, various sites that Israel claimed were being used as weapons depots were struck from the air. Police stations, schools, hospitals, UN warehouses, mosques, various Hamas government buildings and other buildings. 112. Israel said that the attack was a response to Hamas rocket attacks on southern Israel, which totaled over 3,000 in 2008, and which intensified during the few weeks preceding the operation. Israel advised people near military targets to leave before the attacks. Israeli defense sources said that Defense Minister Ehud Barak instructed the IDF to prepare for the operation 6 months before it began, using long-term planning and intelligence gathering. 113. Palestinian medical staff claimed at least 434 Palestinians were killed, and at least 2,800 wounded, consisting of many civilians and an unknown number of Hamas members, in the first 5 days of Israeli strikes on Gaza. The IDF denied that the majority of the dead were civilian. Israel rebuffed many ceasefire calls but later declared a ceasefire although Hamas vowed to fight on. 114, 115. A total of 116 Palestinians, 295 to 926 civilians, and 13 Israelis were killed in the 22-day war. 117. The conflict damaged or destroyed tens of thousands of homes. 118, 119, 15 of Gaza's 27 hospitals and 43 of its 110 primary healthcare facilities. 120, 800 water wells. 121, 186 greenhouses. 122, and nearly all of its 10,000 family farms wink with a frown. 123, leaving 50,000 homeless. 124, 400,000 to 500,000 without running water. 124, 125, 1 million without electricity. 125, and resulting in acute food shortages. 126. The people of Gaza still suffer from the loss of these facilities and homes, especially since they have great challenges to rebuild them. By February 2009, food availability returned to pre-war levels, but a shortage of fresh produce was forecast due to damage sustained by the agricultural sector. 127. In the immediate aftermath of the Gaza war, Hamas executed 19 Palestinian Fatah members, on charges that they had collaborated with Israel. Many had been recaptured after escaping prison which had been bombed during the war. 128, 129, the executions followed an Israeli strike which killed 3 top Hamas officials, including Said Siem, with Hamas charging that information on where Hamas leaders lived and where arms were stocked had been passed to Fatah in the West Bank, and via the PA to Israel, with whom the PA shares security intelligence. Many suspected were tortured or shot in the legs. Hamas thereafter pursued a course of trying collaborators in courts, rather than executing them in the street. 130, 128. 2014 Gaza War to present. On June 5, 2014, Fatah signed a unity agreement with the Hamas political party. 131. 2014 Gaza War. 132. Gaza-Israel ratio. Civilians killed 1,606 270:1. Children killed 551 550:1. Homes severely damaged or destroyed 18,118,000:1. Houses of worship damaged or destroyed 203 100:1. Kindergartens damaged or destroyed 285 1285:1. Medical facilities damaged or destroyed 73,073:0. Rubble left 2.5 million tons unknown. The 2014 Gaza War, also known as Operation Protective Edge, was a military operation launched by Israel on July 8, 2014 in the Gaza Strip. Following the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank by Hamas-affiliated Palestinian militants, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, initiated Operation Brother's Keeper, in which some 350 Palestinians, including nearly all of the active Hamas militants in the West Bank, were arrested. 133, 134, 135. Hamas subsequently fired a greater number of rockets into Israel from the Gaza Strip, triggering a 7-week-long conflict between the two sides. It was one of the deadliest outbreaks of open conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in decades. The combination of Palestinian rocket attacks and Israeli airstrikes resulted in thousands of deaths, the vast majority of which were Gazan Palestinians, 136. 2018 to 2019 Great March of Return. Main article, Great March of Return. UN OCHA map of the Great March of Return protests, May 31, 2018. In 2018 to 2019, a series of protests, also known as the Great March of Return, were held each Friday in the Gaza Strip near the Israel-Gaza barrier from March 30, 2018 until December 27, 2019, during which a total of 223 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces, 137, 138. The demonstrators demanded that the Palestinian refugees must be allowed to return to lands they were displaced from in what is now Israel. They protested against Israel's land, air and sea blockade of the Gaza Strip and the United States' recognition of Jerusalem as capital of Israel, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143. Most of the demonstrators demonstrated peacefully far from the border fence. Peter Kamak, a fellow with the Middle East program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, argued that the march indicated a new trend in Palestinian society and Hamas, with a shift away from violence towards nonviolent forms of protest. 144. Nevertheless, groups consisting mainly of young men approached the fence and committed acts of violence directed towards the Israeli border. 145, 146, 147, 148, 149. Israeli officials said the demonstrations were used by Hamas as cover for launching attacks against Israel. 150. In late February 2019, a United Nations Human Rights Council's independent commission found that of the 489 cases of Palestinian deaths or injuries analyzed, only 2 were possibly justified as responses to danger by Israeli security forces. The commission deemed the rest of the cases illegal, and concluded with a recommendation calling on Israel to examine whether war crimes or crimes against humanity had been committed, and if so, to bring those responsible to trial. 151, 152. On February 28, 2019, the Commission said it had reasonable grounds to believe Israeli soldiers may have committed war crimes and shot at journalists, health workers, and children during protests in Gaza in 2018. Israel refused to take part in the inquiry and rejected the report. 16. 2021 Israel-Palestine crisis. Before the 2021 Israel-Palestine crisis, Gaza had 48% unemployment and half of the population lived in poverty. During the crisis, 66 children died, 551 children in the previous conflict. On June 13, 2021, a high-level World Bank delegation visited Gaza to witness the damage. Mobilization with UN and EU partners is ongoing to finalize a needs assessment in support of Gaza's reconstruction and recovery. 153. Another escalation between the 5th and the 8th of August 2022 resulted in property damage and displacement of people as a result of airstrikes. 154, 155. 2023 Israel-Hamas War. Main article, 2023 Israel-Hamas War. Gaza Strip during the Israel-Hamas war, October 10, 2023. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a major attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. 156. On October 9, 2023, Israel imposed a total blockade of the Gaza Strip. 157. The blockade was announced by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who declared, "There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." 158. Governance. Hamas government. Main articles: Governance of the Gaza Strip and Hamas government of 2012. Damaged UN school and remnants of the Ministry of Interior in Gaza City, December 2012. Since its takeover of Gaza, Hamas has exercised executive authority over the Gaza Strip, and it governs the territory through its own ad hoc executive, legislative, and judicial bodies. 159. The Hamas government of 2012 was the second Palestinian Hamas-dominated government, ruling over the Gaza Strip, since the split of the Palestinian National Authority in 2007. It was announced in early September 2012. 160. The reshuffle of the previous government was approved by Gaza-based Hamas MPs from the Palestinian Legislative Council, PLC, or Parliament. 160. The legal code Hamas applies in Gaza is based on Ottoman laws, the British Mandate's 1936 legal code, Palestinian Authority law, Sharia law, and Israeli military orders. Hamas maintains a judicial system with civilian and military courts and a public prosecution service. 159. 161. Security. The Gaza Strip security is mainly handled by Hamas through its military wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, internal security service, and civil police force. The Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades have an estimated 30,000 to 50,000 operatives. 162. Other Palestinian militant factions operate in the Gaza Strip alongside, and sometimes opposed to Hamas. The Islamic Jihad movement in Palestine, also known as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, is the second largest militant faction operating in the Gaza Strip. Its military wing, the Al-Quds Brigades, has an estimated 8,000 fighters. 163, 164, 165, 166. In June 2013, the Islamic Jihad broke ties with Hamas leaders after Hamas police fatally shot the commander of Islamic Jihad's military wing. 164. The third largest faction is the Popular Resistance Committees. Its military wing is known as the Al-Nasser Salah al-Din Brigades. Other factions include the Army of Islam, an Islamist faction of the Dogmush clan, the Nidal al-Maudi Battalion, an offshoot of the West Bank-based Fatah-linked Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, the Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades, armed wing of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Sheikh Omar Hadid Brigade, ISIL offshoot, Humat al-Aqsa, Jaish al-Umma, Katibat al-Sheikh al-Amarin, the Mujahideen Brigades, and the Abdul al-Qadir al-Husseini Brigades. 167. Legality of Hamas rule. After Hamas' June 2007 takeover, it ousted Fatah-linked officials from positions of power and authority, such as government positions, security services, universities, newspapers, etc., and strove to enforce law by progressively removing guns from the hands of peripheral militias, clans, and criminal groups, and gaining control of supply tunnels. According to Amnesty International, under Hamas rule, newspapers were closed down and journalists were harassed. 168. Fatah demonstrations were forbidden or suppressed, as in the case of a large demonstration on the anniversary of Yasser Arafat's death, which resulted in the deaths of 7 people, after protesters hurled stones at Hamas security forces. 169. Hamas and other militant groups continued to fire Qassam rockets across the border into Israel. According to Israel, between the Hamas takeover and the end of January 2008, 697 rockets and 822 mortar bombs were fired at Israeli towns. 170. In response, Israel targeted Qassam launchers and military targets and declared the Gaza Strip a hostile entity. In January 2008, Israel curtailed travel from Gaza, the entry of goods, and cut fuel supplies, resulting in power shortages. This brought charges that Israel was inflicting collective punishment on the Gaza population, leading to international condemnation. Despite multiple reports from within the Strip that food and other essentials were in short supply, 171, Israel said that Gaza had enough food and energy supplies for weeks. 172. The Israeli government uses economic means to pressure Hamas. Among other things, it caused Israeli commercial enterprises like banks and fuel companies to stop doing business with the Gaza Strip. The role of private corporations in the relationship between Israel and the Gaza Strip is an issue that has not been extensively studied. 173. Due to continued rocket attacks including 50 in one day, in March 2008, airstrikes and ground incursions by the IDF led to the deaths of over 110 Palestinians and extensive damage to Jabalia. 174. A watchtower on the border between Rafah and Egypt. Israeli occupation. The international community regards all of the Palestinian territories including Gaza as occupied. 175. Human Rights Watch has declared at the UN Human Rights Council that it views Israel as a de facto occupying power in the Gaza Strip, even though Israel has no military or other presence, because the Oslo Accords authorize Israel to control the airspace and the territorial sea. 69, 70, 71. In his statement on the 2008 to 2009 Israel-Gaza conflict, Richard Falk, United Nations Special Rapporteur, wrote that international humanitarian law applied to Israel in regard to the obligations of an occupying power and in the requirements of the laws of war. 176. Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, Oxfam, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations General Assembly, the UN Fact-Finding Mission to Gaza, international human rights organizations, U.S. government websites, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and a significant number of legal commentators. Jeffrey Aronson, Marone Benvenisti, Claude Bruderlein, Sari Bashi, Kenneth Mann, Shane Darcy, John Reynolds, Yoram Dinstein, John Dugard, Mark S. Calliser, Mustafa Mari, and Ian Scobie, maintain that Israel's extensive direct external control over Gaza and indirect control over the lives of its internal population mean that Gaza remained occupied. 177, 178, in spite of Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, the Hamas government in Gaza considers Gaza as occupied territory. 179. Israel states that it does not exercise effective control or authority over any land or institutions in the Gaza Strip and thus the Gaza Strip is no longer subject to the former military occupation. 180, 181, Foreign Affairs Minister of Israel Tzipi Livni stated in January 2008, Israel got out of Gaza. It dismantled its settlements there. No Israeli soldiers were left there after the disengagement. 182, on January 30, 2008, the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that the Gaza Strip was not occupied by Israel in a decision on a petition against Israeli restrictions against the Gaza Strip which argued that it remained occupied. The Supreme Court ruled that Israel has not exercised effective control over the Gaza Strip since 2005, and accordingly, it was no longer occupied. 183. In a legal analysis, Hannah Quickens agrees with the Israeli position that Gaza is no longer occupied. Gaza is not technically occupied, given that there is no longer any effective control in the sense of Article 42 of the Hague Regulations. Even though the majority argues that the Gaza Strip is still occupied, the effective control test at the core of the law of occupation is no longer met and hence Gaza is no longer occupied. She disagrees that Israel cannot therefore be held responsible for the situation in Gaza because, nonetheless, Israel continues to exercise an important level of control over the Gaza Strip and its population, making it difficult to accept that it would no longer have any obligations with regard to the Strip. The absence of occupation does not mean the absence of accountability. This responsibility is however not founded on the law of occupation but on general international humanitarian law, potentially complemented by international human rights law. 184. Yuval Shani also argues that Israel is probably not an occupying power in Gaza under international law, writing that it is difficult to continue and regard Israel as the occupying power in Gaza under the traditional law of occupation. 185. Avi Bell argues that the Gaza Strip is not occupied as the Israeli blockade does not constitute effective control, citing several international legal precedents that the occupier must be in direct control with forces on the ground and have direct control over the civilian population superior to that of the established government. He argues that Israeli control over Gaza does not meet these standards. 186. Likewise, Alex Stein claimed in 2014 that Israel did not occupy Gaza and its only obligation was to minimize harm to the civilian population during military operations. 187. Characterization as open-air prison. Several rights groups have characterized the situation in Gaza as an open-air prison, including the United Nations, 188, Human Rights Watch, 189, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, 190. This characterization was often cited by a number of human rights activists, politicians, and media news outlets reporting on the Gaza-Israel conflict and the wider Palestinian-Israeli conflict. 191, 192, 193, 194, 195, 11, former British Prime Minister David Cameron, 196, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, 197, former Israeli diplomat Gideon Levy, 198, and Israeli historian Elon Papp have referenced this characterization as well, 199. In 2022, Human Rights Watch issued a report on the situation in the Gaza Strip, which it called an open-air prison, due to the blockade and held Israel responsible as the occupying power, and to a lesser degree Egypt, which has restricted movement of Palestinians through its border. 189, the report highlighted how this blockade has led to humanitarian crises, namely shortages of essential supplies, limited access to healthcare, and high levels of poverty and unemployment among the Palestinian population in Gaza. 189, it claimed that Israel has formed a formal policy of separation between Gaza and the West Bank, despite both forming parts of the Palestinian territories. 189, the Israeli blockade on Gaza has restricted the freedom of movement of Gaza Palestinians to both the West Bank and the outside world. In particular, Palestinian professionals were most impacted by these restrictions, as applying for travel permit takes several weeks. 189. The Norwegian Refugee Council report issued in 2018, called the territory the world's largest open-air prison, highlighting in it several figures, including lack of access to clean water, to reliably electrical supply, to health care, food and employment opportunities. 190, it lamented the fact that a majority of Palestinian children in Gaza suffer from psychological trauma, and a portion of which, from stunted growth. 190, statehood. Some Israeli analysts have argued that the Gaza Strip can be considered a de facto independent state, even if not internationally recognized as such. Israeli Major General Giora Eiland, who headed Israel's National Security Council, has argued that after the disengagement and Hamas takeover, the Gaza Strip became a de facto state for all intents and purposes, writing that it has clear borders, an effective government, an independent foreign policy and an army. These are the exact characteristics of a state. 200. Yagal Levy, a professor of political sociology and public policy at the Open University of Israel, wrote in a Haaretz column that Gaza is a state in every respect, at least as social scientists understand the term. It has a central government with an army that's subordinate to it and that protects a population living in a defined territory. Nevertheless, Gaza is a castrated state. Israel and Egypt control its borders. The Palestinian Authority pays for the salaries of some of its civil servants. And the army doesn't have a monopoly on armed force, because there are independent militias operating alongside it. 201. Moshe Arentz, a former Israeli diplomat who served as foreign minister and defense minister, likewise wrote that Gaza is a state as it has a government, an army, a police force and courts that dispense justice of sorts. 202. In November 2018, Israeli Justice Minister Ayelet Sheikh asserted that Gaza is an independent state, stating that Palestinians already have a state in Gaza. 203. Jeffrey Aronson has likewise argued that the Gaza Strip can be considered a proto-state with some aspects of sovereignty, writing that a proto-state already exists in the Gaza Strip, with objective attributes of sovereignty the Ramallah-based Mahmoud Abbas can only dream about. Gaza is a single, contiguous territory with de facto borders, recognized, if not always respected, by friend and foe alike. There are no permanently stationed foreign occupiers and, most importantly, no civilian Israeli settlements. 204, writing in Newsweek, journalist Mark Schulman referred to Gaza as an impoverished proto-state that lives off aid. 205. Control over airspace. As agreed between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the Oslo Accords, Israel has exclusive control over the airspace. Contrarily to the Oslo Accords, However, Israel interferes with Gaza's radio and TV transmissions, and Israel prevents the Palestinians from operating a seaport or airport. 206. The accords permitted Palestinians to construct an airport, which was duly built and opened in 1998. Israel destroyed Gaza's only airport in 2001 and again in 2002, during the Second Intifada. 207, 208. The Israeli army makes use of drones, which can launch precise missiles. They are equipped with high-resolution cameras and other sensors. The missile fired from a drone has its own cameras that allow the operator to observe the target from the moment of firing. After a missile has been launched, the drone operator can remotely divert it elsewhere. Drone operators can view objects on the ground in detail during both day and night. 209. Israeli drones routinely patrol over Gaza. Buffer zone. Part of the territory is depopulated because of the imposition of buffer zones on both the Israeli and Egyptian borders. 210, 211, 212. Initially, Israel imposed a 50-meter buffer zone in Gaza. 213. In 2000, it was expanded to 150 meters. 211. Following the 2005 Israeli disengagement from Gaza, an undefined buffer zone was maintained, including a no-fishing zone along the coast. In 2009/2010, Israel expanded the buffer zone to 300 meters. 214, 213, 215. In 2010, the UN estimated that 30% of the arable land in Gaza had been lost to the buffer zone. 210, 213. On February 25, 2013, pursuant to a November 2012 ceasefire, Israel declared a buffer zone of 100 meters on land and 6 nautical miles offshore. In the following month, the zone was changed to 300 meters and 3 nautical miles. The 1994 Gaza-Jericho Agreement allows 20 nautical miles, and the 2002 Bertini Commitment allows 12 nautical miles. 214, 211. In August 2015, the IDF confirmed a buffer zone of 300 meters for residents and 100 meters for farmers, but without explaining how to distinguish between the two. 216. As of 2015, on a third of Gaza's agricultural land, residents risk Israeli attacks. According to PCHR, Israeli attacks take place up to approximately 1.5 kilometers, 0.9 miles, from the border, making 17% of Gaza's total territory a risk zone. 211. Israel says the buffer zone is needed to protect Israeli communities just over the border from sniper fire and rocket attacks. In the 18 months until November 2010, one Thai farm worker in Israel was killed by a rocket fired from Gaza. In 2010, according to IDF figures, 180 rockets and mortars had been fired into Israel by militants. In 6 months, 11 Palestinian civilians, including 4 children, had been killed by Israeli fire and at least 70 Palestinian civilians were injured in the same period, including at least 49 who were working collecting rubble and scrap metal. 210. A buffer zone was also created on the Egyptian side of the Gaza-Egypt border. In 2014, scores of homes in Rafah were destroyed for the buffer zone. 217. According to Amnesty International, more than 800 homes were destroyed and more than 1,000 families evicted. 218. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas agreed with the destruction of smuggling tunnels by flooding them, and then punishing the owners of the houses that contained entrances to the tunnels, including demolishing their houses, arguing that the tunnels had produced 1,800 millionaires, and were used for smuggling weapons, drugs, cash, and equipment for forging documents. 218. Gaza blockade. Israel and Egypt maintain a blockade of the Gaza Strip, although Israel allows in limited quantities of medical humanitarian aid. The Red Cross claimed that the blockade harms the economy and causes a shortage of basic medicines and equipment such as painkillers and X-ray film. 219. Israel claims the blockade is necessary to prevent the smuggling of weapons into Gaza. For example, in 2014, a Panamanian-flagged ship claiming to be carrying construction materials was boarded by the IDF and was found to contain Syrian-produced rockets. 220. Israel maintains that the blockade is legal and necessary to limit Palestinian rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip on its cities and to prevent Hamas from obtaining other weapons. 38, 39, 36, 221, 222, 223. Director of the Shin Bet, Israel security agency, Yuval Diskin did not oppose easing trade restrictions, but said that smuggling tunnels in Sinai and an open seaport in the Gaza Strip endangered Israel's security. According to Diskin, Hamas and Islamic Jihad had smuggled in over 5,000 rockets with ranges up to 40 kilometers, 25 miles. Some of the rockets could reach as far as the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, 224. Israeli spokesman Mark Regev described Israel's actions as sanctions, not a blockade, but a Gazan legal consultant for UNRWA called the blockade an action outside of international law. Citation needed. In July 2010, British Prime Minister David Cameron said, "Humanitarian goods and people must flow in both directions. Gaza cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp." 225. In response, the spokesman for the Israeli embassy in London said, "The people of Gaza are the prisoners of the terrorist organization Hamas. The situation in Gaza is the direct result of Hamas rule and priorities." Tent Camp, April 2009, after cast lead. The Arab League accused Israel of waging a financial war. 226. The IDF strictly controlled travel within the area of the crossing points between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and sealed its border with Gaza. U.S. government travel guides warned tourists that the region was dangerous. Facing mounting international pressure, Egypt and Israel lessened the restrictions starting in June 2010, when the Rafah border crossing from Egypt to Gaza was partially opened by Egypt. Egypt's foreign ministry said that the crossing would remain open mainly for people, but not for supplies. 227. Israel announced that it would allow the passage of civilian goods but not weapons and items that could be used for dual purposes. 228. In December 2015, Egypt asked Israel not to allow Turkish aid into the Gaza Strip. 229. Benjamin Netanyahu replied that it was impossible to lift the siege on Gaza and that the security of Israel is the primary issue for him. He confirmed in December 2015 that Israel is the only country that currently sends supplies to the coastal enclave. 230. In January and February 2011, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA, assessed measures taken to ease the blockade, 231, and concluded that they were helpful but not sufficient to improve the lives of the local inhabitants. 231. UNOCHA called on Israel to reduce restrictions on exports and the import of construction materials, and to lift the general ban on movement between Gaza and the West Bank via Israel. 231, after Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak resigned on May 28, 2011, Egypt permanently opened its border with the Gaza Strip to students, medical patients, and foreign passport holders. 231, 232. Following the 2013 Egyptian coup d'état, Egypt's military has destroyed most of the 1,200 tunnels which are used for smuggling food, weapons, and other goods to Gaza. 233. After the August 2013 Raba massacre in Egypt, the border crossing was closed indefinitely. 234. Israel has alternately restricted or allowed goods and people to cross the terrestrial border and handles vicariously the movement of goods into and out of Gaza by air and sea. Israel largely provides for Gaza's water supply, electricity, and communications infrastructure. While the import of food is restricted through the Gaza blockade, the Israeli military destroys agricultural crops by spraying toxic chemicals over the Gazan lands, using aircraft flying over the border zone. According to the IDF, the spraying is intended to prevent the concealment of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and to disrupt and prevent the use of the area for destructive purposes. 235. Gaza's Agricultural Research and Development Station was destroyed in 2014 and again in January 2016, while import of new equipment is obstructed. 236. Movement of people. Because of the Israeli-Egyptian blockade, the population is not free to leave or enter the Gaza Strip. Only in exceptional cases are people allowed to pass through the Erez crossing or the Rafah border crossing. 214, 237, 238, 239. In 2015, a Gazan woman was not allowed to travel through Israel to Jordan on her way to her own wedding. The Israeli authorities found she did not meet the criteria for travel, namely only in exceptional humanitarian cases. 240. Under the long-term blockade, the Gaza Strip is often described as a prison camp or open-air prison for its collective denizens. The comparison is done by observers, ranging from Roger Cohen and Lawrence Weskler to NGOs, such as B'Tselem, and politicians and diplomats, such as David Cameron, Noam Chomsky, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, David Shoebridge and Sir John Holmes, 241, 242, 243, 244, 245, 246, 247, 248. In 2014, French President François Hollande called for the demilitarization of Gaza and a lifting of the blockade, saying Gaza must neither be an open prison nor a military base. 249. An anonymous Israeli analyst has called it Israel's Alcatraz. 250, while Lauren Booth, 251, 252, Philip Slater, 253, Giorgio Agamben, 254, compare it to a concentration camp. For Robert S. Wistrich, 255, and Philip Mendez, 256, such analogies are designed to offend Jews, while Philip Sieb dismisses the comparison as absurd, and claims that it arises from sources like Al Jazeera and statements by Arab leaders. 257. Israel restricts movement of Palestinian residents between the West Bank and Gaza. Israel has implemented a policy of allowing Palestinian movement from the West Bank to Gaza, but making it quite difficult for Gaza residents to move to the West Bank. Israel typically refuses to allow Gaza residents to leave for the West Bank, even when the Gaza resident is originally a West Bank resident. The Israeli human rights organization Gisha has helped Gaza residents who had moved from the West Bank to Gaza return to the West Bank, arguing that extremely pressing personal circumstances provide humanitarian grounds for relief. 258. Economy. See also, Economy of Gaza City, Economy of the State of Palestine, and Blockade of the Gaza Strip. See View from the Al Dara Hotel on the Gaza coast. A resort in the Gaza Strip built on the location of the former Israeli settlement of Netzarim. The economy of the Gaza Strip is severely hampered by Egypt and Israel's almost total blockade, the high population density, limited land access, strict internal and external security controls, the effects of Israeli military operations, and restrictions on labor and trade access across the border. Per capita income, PPP, was estimated at $3,100 in 2009, a position of 164th in the world. 70% of the population is below the poverty line according to a 2009 estimate. 17. Gaza Strip industries are generally small family businesses that produce textiles, soap, olive wood carvings, and mother-of-pearl souvenirs. The main agricultural products are olives, citrus, vegetables, halal beef, and dairy products. Primary exports are citrus and cut flowers, while primary imports are food, consumer goods, and construction materials. The main trade partners of the Gaza Strip are Israel and Egypt. 17. The EU described the Gaza economy in 2013 as follows: since Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007 and following the closure imposed by Israel, the situation in the Strip has been one of chronic need, de-development and donor dependency, despite a temporary relaxation on restrictions in movement of people and goods following a flotilla raid in 2010. The closure has effectively cut off access for exports to traditional markets in Israel, transfers to the West Bank, and has severely restricted imports. Exports are now down to 2% of 2007 levels. 72. According to Sarah Roy, one senior IDF officer told an UNWRA official in 2015 that Israel's policy towards the Gaza Strip consisted of no development, no prosperity, no humanitarian crisis. 259. Natural resources. Natural resources of Gaza include arable land. About a third of the Strip is irrigated. Recently, natural gas was discovered. The Gaza Strip is largely dependent on water from Wadi Gaza, which also supplies Israel. 260. Gaza's marine gas reserves extend 32 kilometers from the Gaza Strip's coastline, 261, and were calculated at 35 BCM, 262. After Oslo, 1994 to 2007, economic output in the Gaza Strip declined by about one-third between 1992 and 1996. This downturn was attributed to Israeli closure policies and, to a lesser extent, corruption and mismanagement by Yasser Arafat. Economic development has been hindered by Israel refusing to allow the operation of a sea harbor. A seaport was planned to be built in Gaza with help from France and the Netherlands, but the project was bombed by Israel in 2001. Israel said that the reason for bombing was that Israeli settlements were being shot at from the construction site at the harbor. As a result, international transports, both trade and aid, had to go through Israel, which was hindered by the imposition of generalized border closures. These also disrupted previously established labor and commodity market relationships between Israel and the Strip. A serious negative social effect of this downturn was the emergence of high unemployment. For its energy, Gaza is largely dependent on Israel either for import of electricity or fuel for its sole power plant. The Oslo Accords set limits for the Palestinian production and importation of energy. Pursuant to the accords, the Israel Electric Corporation exclusively supplies the electricity, 63% of the total consumption in 2013. 22. The amount of electricity has consistently been limited to 120 megawatts, which is the amount Israel undertook to sell to Gaza pursuant to the Oslo Accords. 263. Backyard industry. Israel's use of comprehensive closures decreased over the next few years. In 1998, Israel implemented new policies to ease security procedures and allow somewhat freer movement of Gazan goods and labor into Israel. These changes led to 3 years of economic recovery in the Gaza Strip, disrupted by the outbreak of the Al-Aqsa Intifada in the last quarter of 2000. Before the Second Palestinian Uprising in September 2000, around 25,000 workers from the Gaza Strip, about 2% of the population, worked in Israel on a daily basis. 264. The Second Intifada led to a steep decline in the economy of Gaza, which was heavily reliant upon external markets. Israel, which had begun its occupation by helping Gazans to plant approximately 618,000 trees in 1968, and to improve seed selection over the first 3-year period of the Second Intifada, destroyed 10% of Gazan agricultural land, and uprooted 226,000 trees, 265. The population became largely dependent on humanitarian assistance, primarily from UN agencies, 266. The Al-Aqsa Intifada triggered tight IDF closures of the border with Israel, as well as frequent curbs on traffic in Palestinian self-rule areas, severely disrupting trade and labor movements. In 2001, and even more so in early 2002, internal turmoil and Israeli military measures led to widespread business closures and a sharp drop in GDP. Civilian infrastructure, such as the Palestine airport, was destroyed by Israel. 267. Another major factor was a drop in income due to reduction in the number of Gazans permitted entry to work in Israel. After the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, the flow of a limited number of workers into Israel resumed, although Israel said it would reduce or end such permits due to the victory of Hamas in the 2006 parliamentary elections. The Israeli settlers of Gush Katif built greenhouses and experimented with new forms of agriculture. These greenhouses provided employment for hundreds of Gazans. When Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in the summer of 2005, more than 3,000, about half, of the greenhouses were purchased with $14 million raised by former World Bank President James Wolfensohn and given to Palestinians to jumpstart their economy. The rest were demolished by the departing settlers before they were offered a compensation as an inducement to leave them behind. 268. The farming effort faltered due to limited water supply, Palestinian looting, restrictions on exports, and corruption in the Palestinian Authority. Many Palestinian companies repaired the greenhouses damaged and looted by the Palestinians after the Israeli withdrawal. 269. In 2005, after the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, Gaza businessmen envisaged a magnificent future. $1.1 million was invested in an upscale restaurant, Roots, and plans were made to turn one of the Israeli settlements into a family resort. 270. In early March 2012, the head of Gaza's Energy Authority stated that Egypt wanted to transfer energy via the Kerem Shalom crossing, but he personally refused it to go through the Zionist entity, Israel, and insisted that Egypt transfer the fuel through the Rafah crossing, although this crossing is not equipped to handle the 500,000 liters needed each day. 277. In late March 2012, Hamas began offering carpools for people to use Hamas state vehicles to get to work. Many Gazans began to wonder how these vehicles have fuel themselves, as diesel was completely unavailable in Gaza, ambulances could no longer be used, but Hamas government officials still had fuel for their own cars. Many Gazans said that Hamas confiscated the fuel it needed from petrol stations and used it exclusively for their own purposes. Egypt agreed to provide 600,000 liters of fuel to Gaza daily, but it had no way of delivering it that Hamas would agree to, 278. In addition, Israel introduced a number of goods and vehicles into the Gaza Strip via the Kerem Shalom crossing, as well as the normal diesel for hospitals. Israel also shipped 150,000 liters of diesel through the crossing, which was paid for by the Red Cross. In April 2012, the issue was resolved as certain amounts of fuel were supplied with the involvement of the Red Cross, after the Palestinian Authority and Hamas reached a deal. Fuel was finally transferred via the Israeli Kerem Shalom crossing, which Hamas previously refused to transfer fuel from, 279. Budget, 2012. Most of the Gaza Strip administration funding comes from outside as an aid, with large portion delivered by UN organizations directly to education and food supply. Most of the Gaza GDP comes as foreign humanitarian and direct economic support. Of those funds, the major part is supported by the US and the European Union. Portions of the direct economic support have been provided by the Arab League, though it largely has not provided funds according to schedule. Among other alleged sources of Gaza administration budget is Iran. A diplomatic source told Reuters that Iran had funded Hamas in the past with up to $300 million per year, but the flow of money had not been regular in 2011. Payment has been in suspension since August, said the source, 280. In January 2012, some diplomatic sources said that Turkey promised to provide Hania's Gaza Strip administration with $300 million to support its annual budget, 280. In April 2012, the Hamas government in Gaza approved its budget for 2012, which was up 25% year-on-year over 2011 budget, indicating that donors, including Iran, benefactors in the Islamic world, and Palestinian expatriates, are still heavily funding the movement. 281. Chief of Gaza's Parliament's Budget Committee Jamal Nasser said the 2012 budget is $769 million, compared to $630 million in 2011, 281. Demographics. Main article, Demographics of the State of Palestine. Graphs are temporarily unavailable due to technical issues. Population of the Gaza Strip 2020, 282. In 2010, approximately 1.6 million people lived in the Gaza Strip, 17, almost 1.0 million of them UN-registered refugees, 283, the majority descend from refugees who were driven from or left their homes during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The Strip's population has continued to increase since that time, mainly due to a total fertility rate which peaked at 8.3 children per woman in 1991. This fell to 4.4 children per woman in 2013, which was still among the highest worldwide, 17, 284. In a ranking by total fertility rate, this places Gaza 34th of 224 regions, 17, 284. This leads to the Gaza Strip having an unusually high proportion of children in the population, with 43.5% of the population being 14 or younger and a median age in 2014 of 18, compared to a world average of 28 and 30 in Israel. The only countries with a lower median age are countries in Africa such as Uganda, where it was 15, 284. Sunni Muslims make up 99.8% of the population in the Gaza Strip, with an estimated 2,000 to 3,000, 0.2%, Arab Christians, 285, 17. Religious observance. See also, Islamism in the Gaza Strip. From 1987 to 1991, during the First Intifada, Hamas campaigned for the wearing of the hijab head cover, citation needed. In the course of this campaign, women who chose not to wear the hijab were verbally and physically harassed by Hamas activists, leading to hijabs being worn just to avoid problems on the streets. 287. In October 2000, Islamic extremists burned down the Windmill Hotel, owned by Basil Aliwa, when they learned it had served alcohol. 270. Since Hamas took over in 2007, attempts have been made by Islamist activists to impose Islamic dress and to require women to wear the hijab. 288. 289. The government's Islamic Endowment Ministry has deployed Virtue Committee members to warn citizens of the dangers of immodest dress, card playing and dating. 290. However, there are no government laws imposing dress and other moral standards, and the Hamas Education Ministry reversed one effort to impose Islamic dress on students. 288. There has also been successful resistance, by whom, to attempts by local Hamas officials to impose Islamic dress on women. 291. According to Human Rights Watch, the Hamas-controlled government stepped up its efforts to Islamize Gaza in 2010. Efforts, it says, included the repression of civil society and severe violations of personal freedom. 292. Palestinian researcher Khaled Al-Raub has criticized what he called the Taliban-like steps Hamas has taken, the Islamization that has been forced upon the Gaza Strip, the suppression of social, cultural, and press freedoms that do not suit Hamas's view, is an egregious deed that must be opposed. It is the reenactment, under a religious guise, of the experience of other totalitarian regimes and dictatorships. 293. Hamas officials denied having any plans to impose Islamic law. One legislator stated that, you are seeing our incidents, not policy, and that we believe in persuasion. 290. In October 2012, Gaza youth complained that security officers had obstructed their freedom to wear saggy pants and to have haircuts of their own choosing, and that they faced being arrested. Youth in Gaza are also arrested by security officers for wearing shorts and for showing their legs, which have been described by youth as embarrassing incidents, and one youth explained that my saggy pants did not harm anyone. However, a spokesman for Gaza's Ministry of Interior denied such a campaign, and denied interfering in the lives of Gaza citizens, but explained that maintaining the morals and values of the Palestinian society is highly required. 294. Muslim worshippers in Gaza. Violence against Christians has been recorded. The owner of a Christian bookshop was abducted and murdered. 295, and in February 2008, the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, library in Gaza City was bombed. 296. Islamic politics. Up until 2012, Iran and Syria were the two most active state supporters of Hamas, but these political relationships were disrupted due to the Assad government's violent crackdown on pro-democracy protesters during the Syrian Revolution. 297. Hamas backed the rebels, which led to strained ties with the Iranian government, which was actively supporting Syria. The position of Hamas began to decline as foreign support diminished. 72. Salafism. In addition to Hamas, a Salafist movement began to appear about 2005 in Gaza, characterized by a strict lifestyle based on that of the earliest followers of Islam. 298. As of 2015, there are estimated to be only hundreds or perhaps a few thousand Salafists in Gaza. 298. The failure of Hamas to lift the Israeli blockade of Gaza despite thousands of casualties and much destruction during 2008-9 and 2014 wars has weakened Hamas's support and led some in Hamas to be concerned about the possibility of defections to the Salafist Islamic State. 298. The movement has clashed with Hamas on a number of occasions. In 2009, a Salafist leader, Abdul Latif Musa, declared an Islamic emirate in the town of Rafah, on Gaza's southern border. 298. Musa and 19 other people were killed when Hamas forces stormed his mosque and house. In 2011, Salafists abducted and murdered a pro-Palestinian Italian activist, Vittorio Arrigoni. Following this, Hamas again took action to crush the Salafist groups. 298. Education. See also, List of universities and colleges in the State of Palestine. University College of Applied Sciences, the largest college in Gaza. In 2010, illiteracy among Gazan youth was less than 1%. According to UNRWA figures, there are 640 schools in Gaza, 383 government schools, 221 UNRWA schools and 36 private schools, serving a total of 441,452 students. 299. In 2010, Al-Zahara, a private school in central Gaza, introduced a special program for mental development based on math computations. The program was created in Malaysia in 1993, according to the school principal, Majid Al-Bari. 300. In June 2011, some Gazans, upset that UNRWA did not rebuild their homes that were lost in the Second Intifada, blocked UNRWA from performing its services and shut down UNRWA's summer camps. Gaza residents closed UNRWA's emergency department, social services office and ration stores. 301. In 2012, there were 5 universities in the Gaza Strip and 8 new schools were under construction. 302. By 2018, 9 universities were open. The Community College of Applied Science and Technology, CAST, was established in 1998 in Gaza City. In 2003, the college moved into its new campus and established the Gaza Polytechnic Institute, GPI, in 2006 in southern Gaza. In 2007, the college received accreditation to award BA degrees as the University College of Applied Sciences, UCAS. In 2010, the college had a student population of 6,000, in 8 departments offering over 40 majors, 303. Health. Islamic University of Gaza. Statistics. In Gaza, there are hospitals and additional healthcare facilities. Because of the high number of young people, the mortality rate is one of the lowest in the world, at 0.315% per year, 304. The infant mortality rate is ranked 105th highest out of 224 countries and territories, at 16.55 deaths per 1,000 births, 305. The Gaza Strip places 24th out of 135 countries according to Human Poverty Index. A study carried out by Johns Hopkins University, U.S., and Al-Quds University, in Abu Dis, for Care International in late 2002 revealed very high levels of dietary deficiency among the Palestinian population. The study found that 17.5% of children aged 6 to 59 months suffered from chronic malnutrition. 53% of women of reproductive age and 44% of children were found to be anemic. Insecurity in obtaining sufficient food as of 2016 affects roughly 70% of Gaza households, as the number of people requiring assistance from UN agencies has risen from 72,000 in 2000 to 800,000 in 2014, 306. After the Hamas takeover of the Gaza Strip, health conditions in Gaza Strip faced new challenges. World Health Organization, WHO, expressed its concerns about the consequences of the Palestinian internal political fragmentation, the socio-economic decline, military actions, and the physical, psychological and economic isolation on the health of the population in Gaza. 307. In a 2012 study of the occupied territories, the WHO reported that roughly 50% of the young children and infants under 2 years old and 39.1% of pregnant women receiving antenatal services care in Gaza suffer from iron deficiency anemia. The organization also observed chronic malnutrition in children under 5 is not improving and may be deteriorating. 308. Healthcare availability. According to Palestinian leaders in the Gaza Strip, the majority of medical aid delivered are past their expiration date. Monir El-Barish, the director of donations in Gaza's health department, claims 30% of aid sent to Gaza is used. 309. Failed verification. Gazans who desire medical care in Israeli hospitals must apply for a medical visa permit. In 2007, State of Israel granted 7,176 permits and denied 627, 310, 311. In 2012, 2 hospitals funded by Turkey and Saudi Arabia were under construction. 312. Culture and sports. Gaza Amusement Park. Fine arts. The Gaza Strip has been home to a significant branch of the contemporary Palestinian art movement since the mid-20th century. Notable artists include painters Ismail Ashur, Shafiq Redwan, Bashir Sanwar, Majid Shala, Fayez Sarsawi, Abdul Rahman El-Muzayan and Ismail Shamout, and media artists Taser Batniji, who lives in France, and Layla Al-Shawa, who lives in London. An emerging generation of artists is also active in non-profit art organizations such as Windows from Gaza and Eltica Group, which regularly host exhibitions and events open to the public. 313. Archaeology. The Gaza Museum of Archaeology was established by Jawdat N. Qudri in 2008. 314. Athletics. In 2010, Gaza inaugurated its first Olympic-sized swimming pool at the Az-Sadaqa Club. The opening ceremony was held by the Islamic Society. 315. The swimming team of Az-Sadaqa holds several gold and silver medals from Palestinian swimming competitions. 316. Transport and communications. A damaged part of Gaza Airport, May 2002. Transport. Due to the ongoing blockade of Gaza, any external travel from Gaza requires cooperation from either Egypt or Israel. Highways. Salah al-Din Road, also known as the Salah ad-Din Highway, is the main highway of the Gaza Strip. It extends over 45 kilometers, 28 miles spanning the entire length of the territory from the Rafah crossing in the south to the Erez crossing in the north, 317. The road is named after the 12th century Ayyubid general Salah al-Din, 66. Rail transport. From 1920 to 1948, the Gaza Strip hosted sections of the Palestine Railways, connecting the region with Egypt. Marine transport. The port of Gaza has been an important and active port since antiquity. Despite plans under the Oslo Peace Accords to expand the port, it has been under a blockade since Hamas was elected as a majority party in the 2006 elections. Both the Israeli Navy and Egypt enforce the blockade, which limits many aspects of life in Gaza. According to Human Rights Watch, it particularly limits the movement of people and commerce, with exports being most affected. The improvement and rebuilding of infrastructure is also negatively impacted by these sanctions. 318. Plans to expand the port were halted after the outbreak of the Al-Aqsa Intifada. Air transport. The Yasser Arafat International Airport opened in November 1998 after the signing of the Oslo II Accord and the Wye River Memorandum. It was forced to close after Israel deconstruction in October 2000. Its radar station and control tower were destroyed by Israel Defense Forces aircraft in 2001 during the Al-Aqsa Intifada. Bulldozers raised the runway in January 2002. 207, 208, the only remaining runway in the Strip, at the Gush Katif Airport, fell into disuse following Israeli disengagement. The airspace over Gaza may be restricted by the Israeli Air Force as the Oslo Accords authorized. Telecommunications. Telephone service. The Gaza Strip has rudimentary landline telephone service provided by an open wire system. Extensive mobile telephone services are provided by Paltel, Jawwal, and Israeli providers such as Cellcom. Gaza is serviced by 4 internet service providers that compete for ADSL and dial-up customers. Television and radio. In 2004, most Gaza households had a radio and a TV, 70% plus, and approximately 20% had a personal computer. People living in Gaza have access to FTA satellite programs, broadcast TV from the Palestinian Broadcasting Corporation, the Israel Broadcasting Authority, and the Second Israeli Broadcasting Authority. 319. Notable people. MC Abdul, 320. Al-Shafi'i, 321. Muhammad Asaf. Dorotheus of Gaza, 322. Hamza el-Biahazi, 323. Hilarion, 324. Nathan of Gaza, 325. Porphyry of Gaza, 326. Procopius, 327. Sozomen, 328. See also. Al-Bustan Resort. Enclave and Exclave. Gaza Security Force. Hamastan. Human rights in the State of Palestine. International recognition of the State of Palestine. Israeli-occupied territories. Israeli settlement. Military equipment of Israel. Palestinian Declaration of Independence. Palestinian National Security Forces. Philistia. Southern District, Israel. Notes.